So at school bell once again. I was about to lie and say that we actually bought a school bell to do it, but it's still just a YouTube app on the phone. So yeah, we are back, and we're getting a little criminal today. Not necessarily criminal, but we are getting the criminal holders.
We're going penal today.
Yep, super penal. That smooth voice that's sitting to my right, we always do this trick again, and it's never funny either. He is the spinach in the spinach and artichoke dip of the show. He cheated at the golf simulator this weekend, but I'm not going to hold it against him.
I don't know how I cheated.
That's our esteemed co-host, Chris.
How's it going, everyone? Hope you're all having a great day, or on your way to have a great day.
You cheated because you won.
Okay, fair enough.
I just wanted to have a good time.
There you go.
You wanted to keep score.
The game kept score. I don't know how to play it on a mode that doesn't keep score. We're talking Alcatraz, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, this thing, I know because we live here in the States, everyone kind of knows what Alcatraz is or has an idea, has heard the term, has seen the movie, the 1996 cinematic masterpiece starring Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. Excellent premise. Hostages on Alcatraz Island. San Francisco's in danger. Who do you call in to lead a SEAL team to retake it? You get an aging, what I believe is actually James Bond, or supposed to be something like that. I asked you how they got Sean Connery in this role at that age, and they're just like, you're too old to be Bond, but here's the next best thing.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the movie, highly recommend it. Inaccuracies all over the board, but it's still something fun to watch. But we're talking actual Alcatraz today, and kind of the entire run of it from start to finish.
I truly had no idea that it was anything beyond a prison. I had no idea that there was like a rich history. It sort of makes sense because any island that is kind of in a large body of water, if it's close to land, it is sort of advantageous to have control of it.
It's basically, well, I'm kind of like in war terms and everything, how they were talking like Midway.
Yeah.
Because it was an island. It was basically an unsinkable aircraft carrier. And in this situation, looking at it from a military perspective, if you have a strategic there, it's basically something that can control the entire area around the bay.
Yeah. So yeah, Alcatraz, as far as everything goes, we're going to get a little into kind of what it was pre-penal system. And then we're going to hammer the penal system hard because it only was around
this on purpose. Are you just trying to use that term?
No. What did we decide? 29 years was its full run as a prison.
I was just thinking that in comparison to like its history, and most of this is going to focus, probably 75-80% of this thing is going to focus on the time, because that's the most interesting aspect of it, was when the prison was there and kind of what it was put there to do. But starting, a lot earlier, this thing was used for a few different purposes before it got turned into what everyone knows it is today. Before we get into it, guys, remember, rate, review, subscribe. We're going to keep doing this thing as long as you guys keep listening, keep sending us feedback. I will say thanks for the Scottish feedback.
Oh, yeah.
From
I got some penance to make up.
Or a couple episodes ago. We made the comment that Scotland was not involved in World War II. Somehow that slipped through the cracks. I think it's because we were focused elsewhere. They were involved in World War II. Definitely one of the biggest ports that they were using to bring in supplies was in Scotland and everything. They contributed troops to it, and we'll have to touch base on them a little more in a future episode. But that's what we do with your feedback. If we see something that we did incorrectly, we're going to call ourselves out on it.
Yeah. He was right. I was wrong. It's so, like, we don't have fact checkers.
Yeah.
When we say 80% accurate, it's usually nothing to that extent.
You said it with such confidence that I just kind of looked at you and I was like, okay.
Well, and part of that confidence is, just to peel back the onion a little bit, when we research, it could be information that we're taking in anywhere between like 6 a.m. and probably like 2 a.m. conservatively. Sometimes it's high, Sometimes it's sober. Sometimes these things are just tangents. I don't even remember what that had to do with the episode. I think it was just something that I thought that I had seen or that I thought about. I don't know what time it was.
It's where they went and trained.
Okay.
During the SOE,
Down at the
trained, and
Estates.
that's it. Yeah, it was just kind of a passing comment. But anyway, enough about that. We're talking Alcatraz today. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, take me back to what was the actual name of it?
Alcatraz.
No, the La Isla de los Alcatraces.
Before we jump in, are you high enough for a real mind-bending thought that I had today?
Yeah.
I don't remember what podcast I heard it on, but this very smart woman referred to islands as mountaintops.
Yes.
That blew my mind.
Yeah, me and my wife had this conversation because we're going to Hawaii in a couple months.
Oh, yeah?
And we were talking the formation. I was a little stoned, actually, when she asked me the question, because she was like, are there any active volcanoes on Hawaii right now? I was like, oh my God, let me look.
Yeah, there are, aren't there?
I literally just went into a conversation involuntarily of like, do you know how the islands were formed? Essentially, it's over millions of years of volcanic activity under the sea. The volcano, lava comes out, it cools, and then it builds up enough of a landmass. I'm like, we're going to islands that were formed out of volcanoes. But yeah, I mean, if you just drained, there was an image I think that someone had posted where I don't know if it was AI or just like a rendering, but it would be what San Francisco Bay would look like had they drained it.
Yeah.
And so you could see that Alcatraz, basically when all this is drained away, just looks like lowland, and Alcatraz is sitting up on a hill. Yeah, islands are just tall enough mountains that they end up breaking the surface, breaking the sea level.
I had never in my wildest dreams had I ever had a thought even close to that. And when I heard it, it just blew my mind for a second.
Because you're like, oh yeah, we are connected to the...
Yeah.
At some degree, we are, even though it's surrounded by water, we are connected to the ground.
Yeah, there's mountains underwater. There's...
Yeah.
There's like whole ranges. That's where like the Marianas Trench comes in, where it's the deepest point that we know of.
Yeah.
Like... it blows me away that that's like the Grand Canyon of the ocean. It's
the same, almost like the same topography as just above sea level. Yeah. It's just a lower version of that topography.
Dude, it's so weird. It's so crazy. But we go all the way back to 1775, before we were even a nation here in America. Before we sent over the Declaration of Independence, there was a Spanish explorer named Juan Manuel de Ayala. That was a real bad Spanish at the end of that. But he charted San Francisco Bay, and he named the island La Isla de los Alcatraz, which there's weird... Alcatrazes?
Yeah, I think it's
Alcatrazes. But it seems like there was a weird definition of what it was, because like he was speaking Old Spanish. In Old Spanish, it was pelicans.
Yeah, so
but in New Spanish, it's like a different kind of bird, and it's just pelicanos in Spanish.
There's now a simpler word for it in Spanish.
Yeah.
So essentially, there was just a shit ton of birds on this island, so he was just like, hey, Bird Island over there. At some point, when I think you're charting new locations,
oh, yeah.
By the time you come up from Mexico and you're charting along, like, you get to Catalina. It's Catalina Island. But as you keep going up and up, you're just like... This isn't a very big island. I don't want to waste a good name on it. They're like, look at the birds, boss. He's like, it fucking Pelican Island. We're just going to call it that. And crazily enough, like Alcatrazes, it ends up becoming Alcatraz. That's what the translation ends up coming over. So every time we say Alcatraz, we're just saying some variation of like Pelican Prison, Pelican Island.
Yep. And I think kind of before it was transformed, the people just saw it and they just knew that it was an island covered in pelican shit.
There was no reason to go out and do anything to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, to go out to that island at a certain point was just like courting death.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you want to paddle out to that island? Is there like treasure out there on it? And they're like, no, do you just want to go? No, fuck no. I'm not getting in a boat.
No, it's cold water. It's untimely seas that you can't always get figured out. San Francisco Bay is very, very rough. I didn't realize it was as choppy and as dangerous as it is.
Yeah, there's riptides and like just flow and everything like that. It changes. So it's open enough that it's not just a bay in the sense of like there's a flow of water in it, which is going to come into play when we talk about like the escapes and everything, how them leaving at different times of the day could have led to a different draft in the current and which direction it was going. But
it's deep enough too that there are sharks that are in the bottom of it.
Yeah.
Up until recently, the rumor was that there were great whites in there, and that would be something that the prison guards would tell the prisoners at Alcatraz, like, don't try to escape, there's great whites. I think they said that in like the past 30 years is when they started having actual great white sightings in San Francisco Bay, but before that it was just like deep water sharks.
so I've actually toured Alcatraz.
Yeah.
I got to do a night tour, which was fucking great. I wish I would have been older during it. I was like 16, 17.
Yeah.
I appreciate the shit out of it still because I remember a lot of stuff, but I think now I would pay a lot more attention. They were saying what they would spread rumors about is because they would catch great whites and see great whites outside of San Francisco Bay. So they're obviously there, even if it's a couple miles off the coast. So people were aware, well, if there's great white sharks there, then there could easily be great white sharks here. In addition to that, what they said is they would pay fishermen that hooked great whites to bring them into San Francisco Bay, and they would notch one of their fins or cut off one of their fins to where they could only swim in a circle around the fucking island. Now, if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of knowledge of sharks or anything like that, there wasn't a Shark Week back then.
No.
So there wasn't a lot of knowledge on like capabilities and what great white shark. It was just like sharks are fucking scary. Like I've heard fucking horror stories about these monsters.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know if that was fucking true or not.
No.
That you could cut off and you'd be like, oh shit, that makes sense because you can cut someone's arm off and they can live. Or you can like, someone has a limp leg. If they were to run, they would, kind of go in that direction or whatever. But to basically tell them to be like, yeah, they actually drag in or bring in the great whites that they catch and we pay them and they just get them to patrol the island.
Yeah, or they bring them in and show them to you, then you pay them and they just go stab them and dump them. Because I don't think that you can notch a shark's fin and just have it swim in a circle.
You can't do that. It was a fucking story.
That's what I mean, though. Yeah.
But if you're a prisoner and you don't have
knowledge
of
understand.
Aquatic life,
no,
you're gonna maybe think that that's accurate.
Also, I think I read something that San Francisco Bay is brackish water, so there's some.
Is that when salt and fresh water are mixed in?
So that's not really ideal for some sharks. But all in all, it just wasn't an area where a lot of people wanted to go. John C. Fremont bought the island in 1846 for $5,000. He said that he bought it in the name of the U.S. government, which is sort of funny because in 1853, the U.S. acquires California from Mexico after the Mexican-American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and construction on Fort Alcatraz is started for the military. John C. Fremont was like, hey, can I get my money back? They're like, no, you bought it for the U.S. government. He's like, yeah, but I paid my money for it, and you guys just got California and everything, so can you, give me my $5,000 back? And they're like, no.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't really understand that when I was reading that or hearing that information. It's like, okay, so he bought that on behalf, but usually if you buy something on behalf, they're giving you the money and you're just the intermediary. Mm-hmm. Wasn't he like the military governor of California at the time because it was still like a contested territory?
And he so must have tried to put it on his expense report, and then he didn't get paid for it.
If he paid his own money, I would think that he privately owned the island. The government would have to pay it. But at that point, I guess they're like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, new ownership. You bought it from the people that we took it from. So new owners, man. New landlords. Sorry. Fort Alcatraz was pretty fascinating with how big it was. And this is a number that I didn't really understand until I kind of got in perspective of what it was. Fort Alcatraz had 105 cannons mounted on it by 1866, and it actually held the San Francisco Arsenal during the Civil War. So 105 cannons in one fort is a ton of cannons. I think I saw that there were it was like Sumter and another one back east.
There were two big forts. One was Sumter. I can't remember what the other one was, but they said they had more cannons on Alcatraz than those two major forts that took part in the Civil War had combined when you added both of them up. They had so many fucking cannons on this thing that they didn't even have enough guys garrisoned on the island to work all the cannons at once.
What?
They would essentially have to like split up and only operate a certain portion of the cannons. And I was trying to think of this in my head, how this would work. Because, you know, the cannons could only swivel certain ways in their mounts.
You got 45 degrees at most.
Yeah,
probably.
maybe. And so if you're thinking about it like a clock, you know, the ship starts coming past and you just see the guys moving from cannon to cannon to cannon, just like in little groups and just leaving the ones that they've already fired.
They just have them all at like the furthest right that they can get to it, and then they just run down the line.
They said some of these, and I'm sure this wasn't all, they probably had different varying degrees of like caliber. One of them could launch 450-pound cannonballs like 3 miles. Back
That's a
then,
big cannon.
that's a big fucking cannon. Like, how do you even make something like that back then?
I don't know, but I sure as shit would love to watch them test it.
Oh god, yeah. I was thinking about that too. Like, you just aim it in a direction you don't know where anyone's at. You fire it, and then you try to look for a poof of dust.
Yeah, or
then
a shot into the water, a big splash, anything like that. Because a 450-pound cannonball is going to make a big.
But
big
3
splash.
miles away.
True.
Like, what do you
just
head
have
in that
people
direction-
stationed?
You just head in that direction until you find the fucking cannonball.
Oh yeah, that makes total sense because it's just sticking in the ground.
Yeah.
Huh.
Crazily enough, never fired a shot during the Civil War. Never fired, probably did training and everything, but they never fired a shot in conflict during the Civil War. There was part of the reason why they also built Fort Alcatraz is that they were kind of concerned also because that was newly acquired territory from, the Spanish government or from Mexico. And then you also then had to worry about stuff coming in from like China and everything. So they had to have something that could defend that. So along with Alcatraz, they also had kind of at the points where the Golden Gate Bridge crossed, where it's the narrowest points right there.
Yeah.
They had Fort Point and Lime Point.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and they were supposed to form this like triangle of defense to where if somehow those ships got past those two that could basically catch them in a crossfire entering the bay, then you had from the front Alcatraz that was firing on them, could fire out on them at anywhere in the bay.
Yeah, it's not exactly like a halfway point in the middle, but it's further enough out there. I think it's like 1.5 miles off of shore from San Francisco.
1.25.
Okay. So very, very close, but still 1.25 to get a shot out further. Granted, you do have a cannon that fires 3 miles, but it's probably pretty hard to aim, and you got to get the timing pretty well because, again, it's still a cannon.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's why you have 105 of them.
Yeah,
it's
true.
It's just volley fire.
But it does give you kind of this extra strategic defense out there. Also, even though it was American land that we had just acquired through the war, going into the Civil War, you still had Confederate sympathizers who were trying to push west, because if you could get west and you could claim these new territories, when it came time to come to the bargaining table, whether you won or lost...
What are you in control of?
Yep. Exactly. So it was the first place on the West Coast where a lighthouse was built. That kind of seems crazy, that you wouldn't see one off of the coast before you would see one off of the bay.
You would think you would want to tell them at least where the entry point of the bay was, with maybe a couple lighthouses. And then, yes, by all means, have one in the bay. But when you come around the bay and you start seeing a lighthouse, are you like... do we head straight for it? Because who knows if there's low points where they're just going to smash on something. Seems like a kind of a weird, it's a cool fact, but it seems like a weird place just strategic-wise that you would put a lighthouse, especially at the entrance, when it's not at the entrance to the bay.
We were experimenting back then. We didn't quite understand lighthouse technology.
That's true, and it's also foggy as shit. And the other thing, too, is how many were full-blown ocean-going vessels, again, pre-Panama Canal, so the only U.S. ships... that were coming around had to go all the way around South America. So maybe it made more sense because it was like merchant travel just going about the bay to make sure that no one crossed and hit, because it got foggy at times. I'm sure that's probably what it was. It was more for small scale traffic within the bay.
That makes sense, especially if you're going back and forth to Alcatraz. Yeah, I get that. But during the Civil War, Alcatraz held everything from Confederate sympathizers to privateers, and even our own men who would get a little bit too drunk. Instead of being court-martialed, the process, I think, more was just to wring them out and dry them out by throwing them in a cell and letting them sit there for 20 days. That stockade, I think, is...
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what they did before that.
There would have had to have been some sort of punishment, but that was kind of what it was. And it wasn't even like there were cells. I wanted to say there were like little rooms that were below the watchman's tower.
Yeah.
They would
At this
keep them
point,
in.
because it was essentially, previously a base, you would probably have somewhere that was like, what do you call it in a base? The prisons. Fuck. There's a term
Brig?
for it. The brig. Something like, or like in a ship, it's like the brig.
Yeah.
You would still have some place that you could put soldiers that were in need of reprimand or something like that. But it started to slowly then become almost like a hybrid. First military fort, then kind of military fort with some prison capabilities. Then it becomes like military fort / prison. And then basically it's just like, now it's a military prison. So at that point, it does kind of become a military prison for the Department of the Pacific. So
That's
like
a
you were
lot of
saying,
people.
I know. So
A
anyone
lot of
within
area.
that region that needs to be sent there, which seems so weird that you would, unless they were from that area, you'd just be spending resources sending them there for a small stint, than just keeping them where they are, so that way as soon as their sentence is up, they can get back to work.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I have no understanding of the military. There probably wasn't dishonorable discharge back then. It was like you're either working actively, you did something wrong, we don't want to discharge you because we're still going to need you, so we're just going to throw you in the brig for 3 weeks.
We're going to squirrel your way until we need to call upon you.
You're never going to do anything really bad enough that we're going to fire you. If you do something bad enough that's a fireable offense, we're just going to kill you for it. But anything below that, we're just going to toss you in this shitty prison.
Well, as early as the 1870s, it housed, 1867. That's when the first brick jailhouse was actually built. So the first like dedicated building. And they had to, this island wasn't like built ready. When they came out and built the fort, they had to level off certain land. And I think they also did level it off a little bit more toward the top as they started to build these new buildings, because they knew they were going to need essentially flat foundations and surfaces to build these, because you're not just building right up out of the rock.
Yeah, you can't. It's not level enough unless you're Egyptian.
Yeah, there you go. And then by 1868, it was actually designated as the long-term military prison in that area. 1870s, didn't take long to start putting people in there that shouldn't have been in there. It housed Native Americans who refused orders to give up their children. If you remember back from the Geronimo episode, we talked a little bit about essentially like the children being taken from native tribes, forced to assimilate, put it into schools, and then basically sold off to families and whatnot.
Yeah, the Indian schools. They were trying to wipe away any Native American culture from their children, and if you said no and you refused to give up your children, they would just take your children and then they would throw you in this military
To
prison.
Pelican Island with you.
Yeah, dude.
Doesn't that sound like a magical place?
So fucked up. 1898, during the Spanish-American War, the population of the prison reached 450. I think at its max, when it was running as a federal prison, I think it was 336 was the prison population.
Yeah.
So they were definitely stretching the resources, throwing 450 people in this very small prison.
Yeah, one thing about Alcatraz, too, is it's crazy how infamous it is, despite its size, because most maximum security prisons have, like, what they say, 1,300 to 1,500 prisoners is kind of the average.
That still doesn't sound like a lot.
That sounds like a ton to me.
Really?
In one just complex building, it's not like a city. It's in one complex, one building, all of those, and everything in full control. But with Alcatraz, because it was already kind of controlled by its natural borders, they had and because it was constricted essentially by its size and what it could do to support itself. Yeah, like you said, it never got above 336. So the fact that they had a population of 450 there with the facilities that they did, man, that did not seem like a nice place to be at that point. Especially considering that when we get into also kind of the sustainability about it, there's no natural resources on Alcatraz.
No.
Even the drinking water has to be brought in essentially by boat from the mainland, just because there's no place to grow anything. It's a rock outcrop island. So anything and everything had to be brought to support that island.
Yeah, you have no soil to grow anything unless it's brought
Mm-hmm.
in, and even then, you need to bring in the water to water that
You're
soil.
not catching enough fish.
No,
Everyone fishing on the banks aren't catching enough to support the island.
no, and it just was such a private place to keep. Which again, even back then, I think it served its purpose as the natural barrier. I don't think there were a lot of fences back then they put up. I think they were just like, give it a shot. You can swim if you want, but that's what it's going to be. The original cells were kind of like horse stalls.
You make the swim, just keep going, man. You're free. That's
Yeah.
the test. If you can make
Yeah.
that swim,
Yeah, this is like going through PT all over again. If you can make the swim, you're good. But the first cells in there were kind of like horse stalls because it was all wood. Even though it was a brick building, all of the
just a brick shell.
yeah, and everything inside. And there again, it goes to the point of like they weren't really trying super hard to keep these people inside their cells because they made them out of wood.
Yeah.
You gave somebody ample amounts of time, and then
You may get out of the wooden cell, but good luck against
yeah,
Yep. Head security guard Ocean.
yeah. The main cell block that was still up today, there was a weird word for it that I kept hearing. It sounded like a church house or something like that, but it was
Citadel.
Citadel, that's what it is. I think it is a church building. I think there's a college named after it too.
Well, a citadel traditionally is in like medieval times when for fortresses, you would have, the outer fortress, which was the wall around your castle, your city, and everything. The citadel was essentially a heavily defensible position within that would normally be like the keep. It would be just a really defensive, and that would be the citadel within that area.
God damn, you're smart.
I just know a lot about times when people killed each other for ridiculous reasons. But yeah, so essentially the citadel that was being used by the military fort and everything like that was then kind of like that was re-engineered to become one of the cell blocks, right?
They had, I believe it was 3 tiers, maybe 4 tiers in that one. When they transferred it over to the Bureau of Prisons, which we're getting to, and the feds took over, I think they took one layer out, or maybe they made the bottom layer that they called the first layer because it was kind of like the pyramids, where the first floor was essentially the basement. It was built below ground level.
Okay.
So they had the first floor there, and then there were the 3 on top. They just made the first floor the basement, and so they had the 3 tiers. When it switches over in 1933, you have cell block A, cell block B, C, and then D.
So the thing about the cell blocks as well, everything is, I think now when they're referring to cell blocks, they may also be in different buildings or different sections for compartmentalizing.
They're partitioned off.
Correct.
So there's doors to get in between
yes,
them.
Yes, to a degree. So they're all housed within one big building. And at the time, I think they said it was 500 feet long, correct? Mm-hmm. At the time it was built, it was the largest building constructed, right? Or the largest concrete building in the world at the time when it was built, which is kind of crazy to think about. But this is also pre-World War I, so not a lot of ongoing large construction projects, but still kind of weird that it was the largest concrete building.
It has to be America. Because wasn't the Colosseum?
Concrete building.
Yeah.
They don't consider the Colosseum made out of concrete.
Oh, it's just the outer shell that was concrete? I mean, there's concrete holding the blocks together.
Correct, but they don't consider that like poured concrete or something like that.
Huh.
Also, kind of a fun fact. I know you're not a big Call of Duty guy.
Yeah. Well, I like it. I appreciate it.
The Warzone map, Rebirth Island, is a replica of Alcatraz.
Really?
It's insanely detailed. I've been there. So you can look at videos and pictures of Alcatraz and pick them out on where they're at in the exact same places. I'm not sure as far as scale and everything it is, but it definitely has all like the power plant, the water tower, the cell blocks. You can actually go inside them and move around. So kind of if you're looking for, and you do play Call of Duty, you have before, that's the layout of Alcatraz. That's how it's set up. You have the lighthouse and then the warden's house kind of built into it. Those are all burned out, but in the game, they're all still recreated as houses and everything.
They're burned out in real life, I'm pretty sure.
No, they're not in the game. That's what I was saying. They're burnt out in real life, but not in the game.
Oh, gotcha. I thought you meant they were burnt out in the game.
No, so you are in this, kind of getting back to my point, the cell block. So you get into this big building, and like Adam was saying, it's 3 stories. You walk in and you're already on kind of what they consider the ground floor. And there's 3 tiers of cells. So if you were to walk down what they called Broadway, it was like the main walkway, and it was between blocks B and C. On the other side of B, you had cell block A on the other side facing the other direction. So like it was like the backs of the cells were against each other, and there was a corridor between them, and then you would have, so basically it went A facing this way, B facing the opposite way, B and C facing each other, and then D facing the opposite way. And it was Broadway was the one between B and C. I'm trying to remember what the other 2 were.
C and D touched each other. I believe there was just one wall that separated the 2 of them.
Correct. No. What I mean is, what did they call the walkway?
I don't think there was a walkway. I think it was just sally ports to go through.
No. I mean, like, so you had...
down the row of cells?
Yes.
I don't know.
It was
assume it was all Broadway.
It was named, so the main one was named Broadway, but they named the other ones, I'll look it up here in a second, but they named the other ones after other well-known streets. Everything had, like, nicknames based on, like, American cities or, like, landmarks. And so, yeah, you have 3 tiers of these cells going all the way up, and then this really long walkway. So as you were coming down here, it was just literally nothing but cells on either side of you.
And they really didn't use Block A too much. I think they still had wooden cells in Block A for a really long time.
Yeah, the main ones that were used were B and C, the ones facing each other, and then Broadway down the middle of it, the walkway. And then they didn't use D that much. They used it mostly for solitary.
Oh, they did.
Okay, sorry.
It was segregation.
Oh, okay, that's
right. And then out of segregation, there were 5 cells that were solitary confinement.
The ones down along the floor that had that were the steel doors over them, and then just the little slits. Mm-hmm. Also, one thing to think about is with those 2 mostly populated blocks facing each other, the only ones that would face out through the windows, that they actually had windows to get some natural light in, they had skylights to let it in. Do you think it was purposely that they didn't really use those 2 sides to let people have an actual, like, view outside? Just as part of the psychological aspect of it? Or just because, I guess, it would be easier to monitor the prisoners if they're all in a smaller area?
I think,
like, tighter together.
The placement of the windows, I think, is honestly part of the torture. Just because to be able to see freedom... there's so many other prisons in the country where, like, you can't see a major city. Alcatraz, they said at night, as you were a prisoner, you could see the lights, and if the wind was blowing the right way, you could smell and you could hear people talking out on the wharf.
Yeah, or smell the chocolate from the Ghirardelli factory or something like that. Mm-hmm.
That's more mental torture, I think, than anything maybe besides the hole. Because you're locked away on this island, and you can see freedom, you can see fun, you can see a good time, but in between you and that is a bunch of bars, a bunch of razor wire, and then a long-ass swim.
So between A block and B block, it was Michigan Avenue.
Okay.
The central walkway was called Broadway. And then the corridor between B and the library was named Park Avenue. And then there was a corridor in D block named Sunset Strip.
Nice.
So really nice places that would remind people that there was a world out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they're not getting to it.
Well, and once it gets transferred over to the Bureau of Prisons, it becomes a federal prison. And when you become a federal prison, I don't really know. I think everybody kind of understands how the penal system works. You have jails, which are meant to be like short-term holding for people that haven't been convicted but just been accused and can't pay bail. There's a few other kind of uses for a jail, but a prison is anything long-term. And you have state prison, I believe, and then you have federal prison. And state prisons deal with state crimes, federal prisons deal with federal crimes. Federal crimes back then, bank robbery was so big back in the Great Depression because nobody really gave a shit about the banks after they had all failed them. So,
man, copper.
Yeah.
Taking this money, Shay.
You kind of cheered on the bank robbers.
It was the era of the gangsters.
Yeah.
Coming out of World War I, essentially you had a rise in, because of all the guns and everything like that, also prohibition during that time frame. You get a lot of people bootlegging, a lot of, crime bank robberies because the United States was starting to spread out a lot more. There was a lot more opportunity in places to do that kind of stuff. So because all of this was on the rise, they needed basically almost a place to make a statement, it feels like.
Yeah.
To be like, hey, we're handling this problem, the federal government, we're going to protect everybody. We're actually designing this new prison. It's on an island, and we're going to be taking the worst of the worst, and we're going to be putting them here to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, it was like a punitive. Is that the right word for that? Like, kind of like a way to threaten people into not committing crimes.
Something like that, yeah. A deterrent.
A deterrent. That was
Yeah.
the word I was looking for.
It would be a punitive deterrent.
Okay. But it's kind of one of those things where it was almost like the whole idea, I think, partially behind sentencing somebody to death is it's a deterrent away from committing gruesome murders and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
Statistically, I don't really think that that's true. But the reason that Alcatraz was built out on this rock was because all these other federal prisons, when you would have a problem with somebody in federal prison, there wasn't like another place that you could send them that was worse. You would just be kind of shuffling them in between federal prisons.
Mm-hmm.
So when Alcatraz comes online and it's the inescapable prison, anybody that's a dickhead, anybody that's really hard to deal with, anybody that tries to escape or does escape a lot, you send them to the big house, because when you send them out to what they called the Rock during the military times, it's just a nickname for Alcatraz.
The Rock.
Yeah, you send them to the Rock, and when they go to the Rock, they can try to escape as many times as they want, but there's a big giant body of water out there that's really cold, and if they can make it out of that, I guess we maybe reassess our situation. Yeah. But until somebody does,
not only do we have room for all the worst of the worst, but all these prisons that were like, okay, we're tired of dealing with this guy. This guy's escaped from a couple of... They had guys escaping from like multiple prisons.
Prison escape must have been huge back then.
I know. But this was kind of like the last stop on it. Like, oh, you think you can keep escaping, and so you would be sent to this place, because that's what it was. It was designed to be the inescapable Rock. And so, with the main cell block constructed, and then after the transfer over to the Bureau of Prisons, it did not take them long to start moving people in. So
it was August 11th, I think, of 34.
Yeah, so you had 33, Department of Justice acquires it. They're like, let's not beat around the bush here. August 34, that's when it is designated the federal prison.
Well, they had to go through and improve it, too.
Oh, yeah.
So it only took them a year of construction to make this thing fully functional as a federal prison? It wasn't going to be top of the line.
I mean, there had to have been, because you essentially built this previously as a military. There was nothing from a military standpoint. You're not going to make that any harder than it needs to be. Whereas prison, you'll make stuff harder than it needs to be to take away the comforts that they have. So all of the stuff and infrastructure they needed was already out there. They might have had to redo the plumbing and kind of, I know they had to replace the bars because they were using previously these flat steel bars that were apparently like super easy to get out of or bend or like file.
They're so thin, and there's no convex to the shape.
Uh-huh.
So you could just grab them and pull them apart, and since they were flat...
What if you put them the longer way? To where like...
Pull them in and out.
Oh, I guess do that. So they switched over and they replaced all the cells with basically rolled steel, and so a lot stronger. They updated the mechanisms for the cells. They're actually really cool when you get to actually see them in person. I know everything is done by computer and all that kind of stuff these days, but when I got to see kind of what they came up with back in like the 1930s for the system of operating and only opening certain cells at a time, it's this weird wall of levers. Mm-hmm. And you would pull this lever down to engage this, and then you could open all of them. Or you could pull this lever down and it would only open every other one. Or you could even get it down to where you could pretty much open individual cells with these levers. I mean...
It was like a switchboard for cells.
Yeah, but you had to have mechanisms connecting all that. It's not just like wire commands to a servo or a motor to open it. Like, this is all actual like analog mechanical shit.
Well, and you have to make sure that you're very accurate with which ones you're pulling, because the last thing you want to do is let the wrong batch of prisoners out of their cells.
Not only that, is that they're reliable enough to never fail or to never just accidentally like not latch correctly. So I mean, the fact that, like you're saying, they did that once it was transferred over there within that year, they must have just been fucking busting their asses to get this thing done. And also, if you've already announced to the public that you've acquired this and that you're designing a new maximum security prison, you're going to put so much funding behind it because the faster it's done, no one's going to complain that you're charging too much to build this prison.
Yeah.
You're like, we're just trying to get this thing built so we can start housing all of these horrible people. They'd be like, oh yeah, makes sense. Okay, keep doing what you're doing.
If I was San Franciscan,
oh, they weren't fucking happy.
No. I get that it's like what they thought was an impossible swim and all that good stuff, but that's still too close to home. Like if you can look out from the front of your house and just see a prison out on an island.
You look at it now and you're like, I would love to have that fucking view because it's a fucking landmark and it's cool as shit. Back when it was the actual prison, when you looked out, you're like, there's a bunch of fucking murderers out there. And yeah, they probably can't swim over here, but what if one of them fucking does?
What if one of them's like an Olympic swimmer that murders somebody?
Like the whole selling point for the nation is like, we're going to put all our bad apples in one basket. And to San Francisco, like, you're fucking putting all your bad apples in our basket. August 11th, the first load, 137 prisoners were brought out to the Rock. They were brought from all of the United States, from Leavenworth, which is in Georgia.
Kansas.
What's the one that was over
Atlanta?
Okay, Atlanta.
Yep.
So from Atlanta, they had a bunch come in from Kansas at Leavenworth. They brought a batch over from Atlanta, and it was the one that had Capone in it. And they said they brought them over.
This is the coolest thing ever. I geeked out when I heard this.
Okay, so they bring them over by train car. And instead of taking them off the train car and then moving them onto like a barge or anything, they literally just had them stay in the fucking train car and hoisted the train car onto the barge. So the only time they ever got out of this train was walking off the fucking docks onto Alcatraz.
How insane is that? Capone, I get it. I think MGK got the same treatment, but Capone, it makes sense because if he has guys stationed in San Francisco for when you pull him out of the train car and they start shooting to try to get him back.
Anything.
No, you don't. But if they're just like, oh man, we'll just roll his train car onto the barge. We don't even got to let him out. We could maybe roll it up close enough and then bring like a cage from the outside. And if it
rolls off the barge, whoops.
Yeah.
Getting off the boat and getting onto the docks, part of me wishes I would have seen it in daylight, so I really could have seen everything, because outside is just illuminated by, the outside lighting and the spotlight. So, but it almost is this weird. It was fucking eerie.
Yeah.
But like you get off and it's just this huge imposing. It's all just looks like it's all vertical up in front of you. It's really imposing when you get off the boat and you're just looking up at this. You're like, oh fuck! Like I can see why. Just at a glance, someone looked at this place and was like, that should be a prison.
There's a weird. Maybe it's just to me, but like I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe that there can be places that just have bad vibes.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily like there's spirits in there that are haunting the place, but just so much bad shit happened there. I hate using the
term energy because it's so dumb.
Yep.
But you walk in there and there's a shift in it where you're just like, even if it makes you feel like it has that place is having its intention or having its intended, desired effect.
Well, and there's nothing physical about it. It's just like it's almost like endorphins. Like it smells a little bit different. It's a little bit clammy. You know
what took place there, or you know what it was intended for. So that's what you go in feeling like is like I could feel how this place is very oppressive.
Yeah, and back then I'm sure it wasn't any better. And to be these 137 prisoners that were all kind of troubled cases. The misconception that I had about it, besides all the military stuff, was I thought it was like the people that were all murderers.
Yeah, like serial killers.
They didn't have those back then, though. Like a double murder was pretty bad. There weren't
most people got away with it.
Yeah, that's true too. But it wasn't always going to be the people. There's a lot of people that were at Alcatraz that didn't have any bodies under them. Like there were just people that were either really good bank robbers, they ran gangs, just like Capone did. He had bodies under him, but he didn't technically do it. But then you had guys that just liked escaping jail,
Yeah.
like the annoying people in prison that had 15 years for armed robbery.
It was a very diverse clientele that was at this place. You had everyone that maybe was just a blue-collar criminal but was really good at breaking out of places and didn't want to be at prison. And you cause enough problems, they're going to send you to the place where you can't cause any more problems.
Well, the other thing that I didn't really comprehend either was I started watching documentaries and it would say like former inmate. And I was like, oh, they were in jail. And then they'd start talking about their time in Alcatraz. And I'm like, wait a second. People survived after Alcatraz? Like, people got paroled after doing a stint at Alcatraz?
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just the end of the line for everybody that went there?
Yes, that's the other thing, too, that you don't really think about is that you look at that place and you're like, oh, people just went there and they didn't get out.
Yeah.
It was all life sentences. Like, that place was intended for people to die in. In actuality, like we just said, it was kind of all kind of on the spectrum as far as like criminals go that were at this place.
You could be doing 15 years, but if you were just a bad enough dude at another place that they didn't want you in their hair anymore, they just sent you to Alcatraz.
Yeah. Or you were the closest federal prison.
Yeah,
or something,
that
and you
too.
had the fucking bad luck of doing that.
They did say it was a pretty rare thing to either be sentenced to Alcatraz or to be released from Alcatraz. You were always transferred there from another prison and then transferred out of Alcatraz to another prison before you hit parole.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about a few of these cases coming up where they're just, you're a bad dude straight to Alcatraz. But on the whole, I think there was like 1,500 total prisoners that...
A little over 1,500 that came
Was that
through
what it was?
essentially within, and again, within 29 years for as few as it could hold all at once and everything.
That's good turnover.
Yeah. Some of the more famous prisoners, and we'll kind of maybe touch base on them individually, but yeah, George Barnes, Machine Gun Kelly, the actual Machine Gun Kelly.
Not the weirdo that's dating a former national treasure.
That's true. It was George Kelly.
Oh, George Kelly.
You had Robert Stroud, who was the famous Birdman of Alcatraz, which...
Oh, we got him. He's coming up.
I know. I'm just naming people and
Okay.
everything. Kelly was in there because he, in July of 1933, he'd kidnapped an oil tycoon named Charles Urschel. And just like we were talking about, he was trouble at other federal prisons, and they were finally like, enough with you, you're heading to the Pelican place.
And MGK is going to get his own episode because he's so interesting. Supposedly, he's from like a fairly well-to-do family, but he met this chick. He met this girl, and she was kind of crazy and wanted the better, finer things in life, and he wasn't getting money from his family because they didn't like him, so he started robbing banks to pay for their wild lifestyle, and he was a hellraiser. He caused a lot of trouble at other prisons, but Alcatraz has a way of changing you. Alcatraz has a way of like breaking you down, and there's so much.
It takes the fight out of you.
Well, there's so much bravado that these guys have on the outside because they always were something. And when you show up to Alcatraz, it doesn't matter what you were on the outside. You don't have a connection with that anymore. All you are is just inmate or
They didn't even
inmate.
do names. Remember, they were
Yes.
only assigned numbers. That was the thing that was also unique about Alcatraz. Is everyone, when you take your mugshot or your prisoner photo, it would say your name and then your number. Alcatraz was just your number. So they already were psychologically being like, you've made it to this point, you are no longer a person. Your inmate number, yada, yada, yada.
You're not shit.
Yeah.
You're just the guy in that cell next to the next guy in the next cell. And when he got to Alcatraz, I guess he changed his tune completely. They said that he was a model inmate. He became an orderly, so he was able to work outside of his cell. He was like the highest level of trust that you could get there. Machine Gun Kelly, this big badass bank robber, kidnapper, all this stuff was broken down into just a model inmate. He transferred.
She wasn't around anymore.
Huh?
She wasn't around
That's
anymore.
true, yeah.
He's just like, oh man, I can just be chill now.
Yeah, once the bad influence is gone, you're okay. You have to go to prison to get away from the bad influence in your life. But again, he was transferred out of Alcatraz in 1951 to Leavenworth, and that's actually where he died. So he made it out. He made it off the rock. Unfortunately, he made it to Leavenworth and then just died there. But I believe he was a life sentence. So he was a guy who was...
I don't think you get the name Machine Gun Kelly if you hadn't killed somebody with a machine gun.
I think it's because that's what he used to rob banks. I don't know if he ever killed anybody. That's
really?
That's gonna be a fun episode to do because I don't think he ever killed anybody. Our next guy, this guy, fantastic nickname, Alvin Creepy Carpus. He was one of 4 people to be given the title Public Enemy #1. I didn't realize that we only had 4 people in that
He was
streak.
the first, I think.
It's him, John Dillinger.
I don't think Capone was ever Public Enemy #1, was he?
He might have been. But it was a major mob title. He ran a Depression-era gang that was involved in robbery and kidnapping, a lot like MGK.
Without the kidnapping.
I think his gang kidnapped a lot of pretty high-profile people too. He may not have done the kidnapping.
Machine Gun did?
Yeah.
Oh.
He kidnapped the oil tycoon.
Oh,
that's what
yeah,
landed him in jail.
Yeah.
But he was arrested May in 1936, and he was do not pass go, do not collect $200 at Leavenworth. We're sending your ass straight to Alcatraz. He did his time at Alcatraz. He was a part of, I think, one escape, but then he got transferred to Leavenworth for 6 months. And immediately after they transferred him, they're like, ah, shit, he's got to go back. Like, we can't have this guy leave this place. So he gets shuttled back after 6 months and spends the rest of his life there, I believe, till the close. And he was the longest serving Alcatraz inmate from 1936 to 1962.
26 years.
Yeah, dude, that's a long ass time to be there.
They said he was creepy as fuck.
Yep.
Like, even other prisoners and guards were like, yeah, that dude is fucked up.
But one of the documentaries that I saw was talking to an inmate. And granted, this guy's on the outside. He seemed like a very reformed man.
Mm-hmm.
Creepy Carpus is definitely dead. He said that he wasn't ever scared of Carpus when he didn't have anything in his hands. He was always scared of Carpus.
He was only deadly if he had a weapon.
Yep.
Or like a gun or something like that, yeah.
So Carpus was a very weird man. This next guy had no idea. This was something I just had surface level knowledge of. Morton Sobel. He was arrested alongside Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Roseberg?
Yeah. Might have been Rosenberg.
Okay. But they were the ones that got charged with espionage and then killed for sending secrets to the Russians.
What was that whole thing called?
Did it have a name?
Yeah.
Was it the Rosenberg trials?
No. Keep going. I'm going to look it up. It had a name for, like, I'll find it.
Okay. So Julius and Ethel were both put to death in 1950. He was given a 30-year sentence and then transferred out of Alcatraz as it closed. But this was another case of you're not going to a normal federal prison. You were just convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage, and you guys were sending secrets to the Russians. He was actually a communist, and when he was interviewed in jail about the reason why he was in there, he said that he bet on the wrong horse.
Yeah. This is why it sounded so familiar. It wasn't the name of, like, the incident and everything, like what it caused. It was where they had gone. It was Sing Sing.
Oh, okay.
When I heard that, I was like, I've heard that term before. Yeah,
It's a jail.
Sing. Yeah.
Sing Sing is in New York.
Yep.
I told you one of my secret naughty time, fun time things is to get stoned and watch that Lock Up Raw on MSNBC where it goes into the prisons. Fascinating to see how prison
Probably, I
life
was going to
works.
say, it probably does well to keep you fucking from doing anything ending up there.
Yeah, but again, it's that thought process of I think people get so infatuated with jails and prisons because they wonder, like, I'm sure that people that have been to jail and prison probably don't ever think about prison the same way that somebody who hasn't been there thinks about it. It's
you were telling me about this earlier, the thing of like, could I make it there?
Yeah.
Like, could I survive there? Yeah. It's the same thing as when you watch fucking Bear Grylls or anything like that, or any like Survivor or whatever those shows are where you're like, could I survive out there? I never want to find out if I can survive out there, but I wonder if I could.
Yeah, dude, it's the last place that I'd ever want to end up. It sounds awful. Our next guy, you just mentioned him, the Birdman of Alcatraz.
Very misleading name.
Super misleading name. Robert Stroud was a bad dude. He committed a double murder at 19, and then he murdered a prison guard at his first stop. I believe it was Leavenworth. The reason that he was called the Birdman of Alcatraz, as Chris just alluded to, when he was in Leavenworth, you were able to buy canaries from the commissary, and he actually raised these canaries and then bred them and ended up becoming a published ornithologist.
Yeah.
He published like multiple works on
The Canary Killer.
just so nuts that he that he would have that sensibility about him. Like, I understand he committed a double murder at 19. He was still a kid. Like, your brain isn't fully formed or anything like that.
You should still know not to double murder.
Yeah, you should, but it's a different kind of intelligence. Like,
I still think there should be a level of intelligence that you don't double murder at 19.
no, but I think it's different from being an ornithologist. Like, I think those are two different kinds of smarts.
Oh, yes, 100%. Well, once you get sent to Alcatraz, despite its name, Pelican Island, yeah, you're not going to be getting any birds there. So there was this, they showed us the cell too, where he spent most of his time.
Yeah.
So because he was in solitary, what was the percentage of time he was in solitary? It was a total of the 19 years total.
Yeah.
Out of the 26, he was in solitary confinement.
His was kind of tricky because he had a kidney infection. So he spent a lot of time in the medical
Infirmary.
unit. And they had like a special room for him in the medical unit where he spent time because he had to be segregated. He was a pretty violent man.
Yeah.
For a guy who loved birds that much, he was a very violent man.
But you would walk into what would be D block, and you had the solitary confinement cells like lower, but because he spent so much time there, I think it wasn't like the whole as far as solitary.
Yeah.
It was just a confinement cell by himself. Like up on the third tier, all the way at the very end, it tucked back in the corner. They're like, and that was the Birdman cell.
That's crazy.
But yeah, not able to raise any birds. So the Birdman of Alcatraz, he was the Birdman before Alcatraz, but there he was just the, I guess, the craziest dude there.
Did you read any of the rumors about how he ended up in Alcatraz?
No.
Supposedly there was some question as to who was supposed to get the royalties for the bird books that he had published, because he was a ward of the state, or ward of the federal government. Federal government wanted the royalties for the books. He said that was mine because I was the author, and then he ended up in Alcatraz before the whole thing got settled.
Think he was going to find his way there anyway?
Maybe, but I think it was like, hey, we can take this dude's royalties. We technically
Literally killed two birds with one stone. Yeah.
He costs us money every day. We can ship him out and we can keep his money. This is a win-win for us.
Yeah.
Man of the hour, Alfonso Capone. He ran the Chicago outfit, the crime syndicate in Chicago. Don't really got to go a whole lot into what he did. He did a lot of bad shit. We're going to do a whole episode on him and all his bad shit.
Go back and listen to the Prohibition episode if you haven't already. We touch on the Chicago outfit quite a bit in that.
Yeah. He actually got transferred in from Atlanta in 1932. He said one of the driving forces behind him being transferred in from Atlanta was, I guess, his cell in Atlanta was, like, he had bribed the guards fully and completely. He had a, I think they said it was like a recliner in his prison cell.
He had so many people in his pocket in Atlanta because, and he was even still running his syndicate from Atlanta. So basically, when you have a prison that's still around a populated area, you're able to have access coming in and out. You're able to get those communications in and out to where he could still kind of control, like, essentially the runnings of his syndicate. They were like, well, that's not going on anymore. So he is sent to Alcatraz in 1934. Now, he has what's called neurosyphilis, which I'm guessing is you get regular syphilis, and then you just have it for so long.
Travels to your brain.
Then it travels to your brain. So when he was
I think he got mind fucked by somebody who was too dirty.
When he was in Atlanta, I don't know if he had any escape attempts, but he definitely, like you said, was living.
He didn't need to escape.
He didn't need to escape.
He had his room and his board paid for and everything else. He had plenty of protection, which...
You've seen it in like movies about prison and stuff like that. If you ever watch like the Daredevil series, like when Wilson Fisk is in prison because he's so powerful, he has all the luxuries and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? That's not why Al Capone was in prison, to keep running his thing. So he was sent over to Alcatraz, and in 1936 ends up getting stabbed by a fellow inmate.
Again, you're not shit at Alcatraz.
Yeah.
You might be the biggest thing in the Atlanta federal prison. You're not shit when you hit that rock. There's no protection for you there. You can't bribe anybody there because you don't have a way to get to anybody.
If anything, your incentive for somebody to fucking knife you, and then you're the guy that took out Capone.
Yeah. Yeah,
You're almost worth
bait.
more on someone's hit list than you are actually alive. Because guess what? the guards here at Alcatraz, they were selected to essentially be corruption proof. So these guards were essentially out of the federal prison system. They had picked the best guards that had the best, essential like records and everything. And whereas normal prisons, I think the ratio was like, it wasn't even like, I don't know if it was like 10-1, 10 prisoners for one guard or something like that. Might have been a little bit less. At Alcatraz, it was one guard to every 3 prisoners. It was the most, like the highest ratio of guards to prisoners in the federal prison system. So not only was it secured just by being the location alone, but you had twice to 3 times the security per prisoner that you had at other penitentiaries. So, and these were guys that weren't going to get bribed.
No.
So Capone, his whole run at living the good life in prison was over at that point.
Oh, no, he still had some more good times because he ended up playing the banjo in the prison band.
That's correct. You didn't let me get to that until he found his new love. Banjo playing in the prison band.
So that neurosyphilis couldn't have been too bad. They said by the time he got to Alcatraz, it was pretty awful, and he just kind of smiled a lot, and that's why he smiles in his mugshot for Alcatraz, is because he just couldn't control it anymore.
They said neurologically, he was deteriorating.
And he ends up being transferred out January 1939, and then he's paroled that same year in November, and he went and retired to an estate in Florida that I'm sure beer money and blood money paid for, and just kind of lived out his days.
It wasn't from working at the prison.
No,
getting paid for that.
No, he probably still had that stab wound for sure, but...
So that's basically the greatest hits for people that had a stay at Alcatraz. Some stays longer than others. We're going to get into prison life, kind of what the day-to-day was like and kind of what the facilities were like. But first, let's take a bathroom break.
Good.
Well, hey there, all you sexy historians. How you guys doing?
It is time for...
socials.
Where can they find us on Instagram?
If they want to follow us, they can find us at Historically High Pod on Instagram.
That goes the same for Threads as well. You can also find us on Twitter.
Tell them about Twitter.
Historically High. That's Historically HI on Twitter.
And if you want to email any of your comments or suggestions, where can they find us at, Adam?
At Historically High Podcast at gmail.com.
Gmail. All right, and back to the show. All right. So what was life at Alcatraz like?
This place, just first and foremost, this should set the tone.
The worst part of prison was the Dementors. Gruel sandwiches, gruel every day.
I think Prison Mike could have done pretty good in Alcatraz. I think he might have had the right stuff for it. But the 4 rights that you were given at Alcatraz, you were guaranteed the right to shelter, that big building that whistles when the wind blows. You were given the right to food, clothing, and then medical care. That's literally it. Those are the 4 things that you're promised when you're there, which Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have food and shelter, but you don't have anything else beyond that. Like you still have other needs that have to be filled to be a normal human being.
Yeah, so anything other than those 4 rights was what they considered a privilege. The first guy put in charge to be the warden of Alcatraz was this guy named James A. Johnston.
This guy's a real dickhead.
Yeah, his associate warden was this guy, J.E. Shuttlesworth. And James Johnson, he, as you would think when you read into it, he was a warden at some of the other federal penitentiaries. I think he might have been warden at Leavenworth at one point, and then San Quentin.
Yeah, he was over in California before he took over Alcatraz.
And so that had to been like getting called up to the fucking... I guess the comparison was that's getting picked by the Yankees.
Yeah.
I hate the Yankees, but that's the analogy, essentially.
Back then.
Yeah.
Time period relevant.
So, because things were privileges here, he enacted what was considered the Code of Silence. So, communication between prisoners at this point was pretty much non-existent. There was no music, so this wasn't during fucking Capone's banjo playing time. It was just essentially meant to, like the prisons are, to basically kind of dehumanize and break people down. And so conversation and any type of like sounds throughout like the blocks or anything like that were almost non-existent at this point.
your code of silence was that you were able to speak on the rec yard and that you were able to speak in the lunchroom. And those were the only two places that you could talk to other inmates. So even when you're sitting back in your cells and you're right next to each other, it was so serious that you couldn't talk to each other. Like you had to, they started, this is where like kiting and writing notes kind of became a big deal because that was the only way that you were going to be able to get any information to somebody else and just to almost know that other people are alive. Because if you're in a big room with a ton of people that aren't able to talk to you, you kind of start to question your sanity.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're seeing people. You're doing 95% of what...
This is where we should talk. This is where, as humans, we should be conversing and having conversation. It does change as far as the rules go, depending on the warden. I think there were a total of 3 or 4 wardens that served during the time. One of them ended up being the associate warden here, J.E. Shuttlesworth. And depending on who it was, there was more lax rules as far as, like, communication for prisoners and everything.
Johnson was a weird case, though. The Code of Silence sounds like torture, but he was also against putting people in straitjackets, which was pretty commonplace back then. Like, a lot of the restrictions as far as, like, physical limitations, he wasn't a big fan of. But, man, did he like to play mental warfare.
Maybe he just thought that worked more. I mean, if you're thinking about it from a standpoint of him having seen what works at certain prison, he's like, I find that the physical stuff isn't as effective as the mental stuff.
That's true. We already got your body. We want your mind.
Oh, yeah, you're already here. What are we going to do, restrain you more? We've already restrained you enough.
It was kind of an interesting situation in the dining hall. Your time was limited. I think they said it was 26 minutes for meals.
Yep.
Your silverware was counted. Every table in there had a guard. And once you were done with your meal, you had to stand up and basically check back in your silverware. So everything was counted at the table and you couldn't leave.
You had to form up in lines, essentially, before you marched back into your cell, lock and everything. And before you were able to leave the, whatever they considered the dining room or whatever. Yeah, the guards would go around and count the silverware and make sure that it was all accounted for. If anything was missing, everyone was fucking searched.
Yep. Big rule. This is a rule that I think parents have used throughout the ages, and maybe this is where it came from. You eat everything that you take.
Yeah, parents don't get to enforce that. That's a threat.
But yeah,
that's an empty fucking threat. I can vouch for that.
But in jail, you have the ability to take things away. So if you didn't eat everything off of your plate the next day, you may have gotten restrictions on what you could eat for breakfast, or they might have just taken your breakfast away. Like, you were going to be punished.
Weirdly enough, they said that the food was the best in the federal prison system.
This blows me away, and I was so excited to get to this part. There's like 10 different places you could interject this in there. But Alcatraz worked primarily under the guise of not being able to bribe guards, because you couldn't get to their families, because their families lived on Alcatraz with them. So you had the protection of knowing that your family was never going to be harassed or tortured or anything beyond Alcatraz, and there was nobody on Alcatraz to do that.
Yeah.
So along with the families living on the island with them, they also ate in the cafeterias. They ate the same food. They said the warden ate the same food as the prisoners. And
I can't remember if it was Johnston, but it would actually walk in, because the security was so tight with guards and everything like that. He would actually walk into the dining hall, the mess hall, by himself. They said one time he was attacked one time, and either the guards got to him or other prisoners got to the guy that was doing everything. It was a little incident, but it didn't deter him, and he continued to do it. He basically had that much faith, or maybe was just that fucking cocky about it that nothing could happen.
Yeah, they had, I mean, by all accounts, a very good spread, though. And it was like, your breakfast was obviously something pretty simple so you could get out and get to work. Your lunch was your biggest meal of the day because you needed that to go out and do your chores. And then dinner was kind of like remnants of lunch. So like kind of stuff done a different way. But it was all really good. They had desserts. That seems like a pretty cool luxury that you get desserts in prison.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this because everything is having to be brought in, and you're having to feed not only the prisoners, but all the staff, families, things like that. It would make sense that they're eating food that's more similar. I mean, you're going to have more luxuries essentially if you're on the staff, if you're the families and everything. Yeah. But at the same time, getting everything just in bulk for one type of thing instead of being like, this is the food for these people, this is the food for these people, it made more sense just to kind of have all of it be similar type food. And in that regard, like the prisoners almost gained the benefit of having all of where they couldn't bribe them everything because everything was kind of locked down.
Yeah.
It was like encapsulated. But at the same time, they got, I'm sure it's not like the benefit wasn't as good for them and everything. And we're not the pro fucking prisoner here as far as the guys at Alcatraz. It's just interesting to think about that was probably one of the benefits that they did reap from having the families there is that they actually ate better.
I gotta say, and maybe I'm a tool for thinking this, but there is the belief, and this is sort of where I think Alcatraz never changed. Alcatraz was never going to work. They said back in the 30s, the average cost per day to feed, clothe, and do everything for a prisoner was about $3 at normal prisons. He said it was about $9 at Alcatraz.
Yeah.
So 3 times the amount of money. But at the same time, I still feel like these guys, even though you're in jail and even though you're in prison, and this I think is kind of a controversial take, like you're still a human being. You've done some really, really bad shit. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have an indeterminate amount of time that you have to be there, if you can be out in 10 years, maybe we start trying to treat these people a little bit better so that way they can get back on the outside and don't have to turn to a life of crime. Maybe recidivism goes down if we treat them more humanely.
They said that this place, it was 100% security enforced over rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like 60-40 or anything like that. It was like 90% security, like 10% rehabilitation. There were 60, they said there were 60 families that lived on Alcatraz. And you're like, well, fuck, it's a small island. A chunk of it's taken up by the cell block. Where are you going to put the families at? There's a building kind of down closer to the actual docks where they would unload stuff. Kind of opposite end from where the actual like water tower is and everything. And it's this big, if you played Call of Duty, it's the big building down by the docks, the big 3-story one. But yeah, all the families lived in like this apartment.
It's like a dormitory apartment.
Yeah, they said they had some like cottages, like individual ones, I'm guessing for people that were more senior staff.
Yeah.
Would probably get that kind of stuff. And then they also had the warden's house, which was right next to the lighthouse. So the warden had this pretty big house there as well. Again, you weren't coming and going to work here. Mm-mm. You literally lived and worked on Alcatraz. Maybe you got to take the ferry into San Francisco on the weekends and
on an off day.
But yeah, can you imagine? I'd be like, I gotta get the fuck off. Even the fucking guards had got to be like, after 5 days, I gotta get the fuck off this island.
Well, and I'm sure that it was probably like a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It would have had to have been something like that because that couldn't just be a 9 to 5, 5 days a week.
Yeah, but your family's living there, so do you have 2 houses?
Yeah, true. I guess if you're on the island, you might as well be working, right?
Yeah. So labor here wasn't forced because technically there wasn't a lot of room to do that kind of stuff. They didn't have room to, put a plant or a factory. They had an energy plant, but they did have a few jobs that you could do. If you did work, it was essentially preferred by the prisoners because you could get out of your cell for 7 hours per day to go work and you could earn a little bit of money. Of course, it's like pennies for the hour or whatever it was.
They had a rule. I think it was your first 5 years. For every 10 days that you worked was a day off of your prison sentence. Oh, shit. And then after 5 years, it became 3 days. After 10 years, it became 5 days. So there was an incentive to stay in these positions because the longer you work, the shorter your stay would be.
And if you're fucking around, you're not going to get these positions. So essentially it incentivized good behavior as well. If you didn't work, you're in your cell literally 23 out of the 24 hours of the day. The only time that they actually ever used the yard was on weekends where they would go outside, and I think they received like 2 hours of yard time.
That's rough, man. That sucks.
Yeah. Once you were in visitation, you were allowed 1 2-hour visit a month from a blood relative or wife. So that's how tight it was.
And it wasn't like face to face, we can hug and love and kiss on each other. It was like through a plate of glass and you were on phones. Mm-hmm. So not a great really way to live as far as trying to keep up any sort of relationships outside of the place. No outside media was permitted. They did have a library, and you had to earn the privilege to use the library. you weren't allowed to leave your cell and go into the library. You actually had to make requests, and then they had an orderly, a librarian, that would drive around the cart like you see in Shawshank.
Yeah, it would be like a prisoner that earned that right, that was trusted to be in there. And so they would come around with the fucking stack, collecting the books that people were done with and picking up or dropping off other ones.
Funny part about the library was they actually went through and censored the books by tearing out anything that was criminal material in nature. So, like, don't get any ideas.
I was going to say, they'd just read that and be like, this guy's a fucking idiot.
Correspondence was only by letter to family or wife, to same people you could get visitation from. They were both heavily monitored. This kind of becomes something that happens later on, I think, after Johnston's tenure. And he actually did soften up a little bit. I think he was the one that rescinded the Code of Silence. But you could write letters out for, like, Mother's Day, holidays, anything like that. These were, I guess, on a typewriter. They would be retyped, and they would send off the handwritten letter, and you would actually get a copy of what you had or what they kept in there and what they didn't deem inappropriate to send back and forth. So you still had a little bit of a grip on the outside world, but it wasn't like you could ever set anything up if you were to escape to have somebody waiting for you on the other side.
Yeah, you weren't creating any lifelines.
No.
Inside the cafeteria, I can't remember what they called them. So they called the cafeteria the gas chamber. Mm-hmm. And the reason they called it the gas chamber is because on the ceiling and on the walls, they had tear gas canisters that they could essentially flood the room with tear gas, like at a moment's notice from like a switchboard or button or something like that.
You press a button, all the tear gas canisters drop to the ground. It can quell a riot very quickly. I think they had them running down the main streets of the
I heard it was just
blocks.
in there, and then that's why one of the situations we're going to get up to, they had to drop.
Oh, they had to drill them and then drop them.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah. So the cells that the prisoners were in, it was one prisoner per cell, so you didn't have a cellie.
God, that's got to be so lucky. You would have to be so happy to not have a cellie.
I think it's give and take.
Oh, I think it's 100% take because you don't
could still,
know.
I guess, talk to somebody. The guy, once you were able to communicate, you could talk to the guy in the cell on each side of you.
What if that guy's way bigger though, and he gets lonely and he butt fucks you in the cell?
That's true.
I'm not giving that. There's no pro to that call.
I said there is a give and take, literally a take. So it was a 5x9 cell. Looking at them like 5x9 sounds small, but seeing them and seeing what they put in here makes it seem all the smaller. Yeah. So it had a bed. It had a little desk against the... so like if you were looking at it, the bed could either be on the right or left, I think, depending on where it was when in the cell block and everything. You then had opposite the bed on the other long wall, you would have like a collapsible like desk or like writing desk. And then on the back wall is where you would have a toilet with no lid or anything, and then the sink next to it. And then down a little bit, either to the bottom left or bottom right of the sink, opposite side of the toilet, I think, there was a 6x9 like, forced air ventilation and everything. So they all had running water in the cells, obviously, because of the sink and everything. Did you know they didn't have hot water there till 1960?
I thought the showers were hot, but the water in the cells was cold.
I heard they didn't have hot water till 1960.
Because one of the things that I read about and heard a few times was they said that part of the reason why they didn't have cold water in the showers was because they didn't want people to be able to climatize themselves.
I thought about that too, about the acclimation for swimming in the bay. If you were taking ice cold showers, then your body would get used to like cold plunges.
Yeah. Yeah, so
you got to imagine too that even if they did have hot water, to make cisterns that size to hold enough hot water for the showers for all the inmates, usage like that, but then also hot water usage for everybody else in non-prisoner positions on the island, all of the families. I'm guessing that there was a lot of circumstances, even if they had hot water for the prisoners prior to 1960, where hot water wasn't available to them.
Yeah.
Just simply based on the usage that they would be wanting the other people on the island would be using.
Yeah, they probably had different cisterns running off at different places. And also at the same time with the shower's not free time. Like you probably had like 10 minutes in a stall or 5 minutes in a stall at most.
Yeah.
And then you're shuttled out and somebody else is shuttled in.
That's true. Block D, one of the ones kind of on the ends was the segregation block. 5 of the cells in there were the hole. So if you were to, the way it's set up is you come in like the entrance, the administration office, and then you walk down Broadway. As soon as you walk in there, if you were to turn right or left, you could go around the first entrance to then go into blocks A and D. The way we saw it was we went all the way down to the end by the cafeteria, then walked over to D, and you could see along the very bottom in the very back corner, kind of below where the Birdman cell would be, were the 5 cells that were the holes. So basically they look like the cells if you were to take a solid steel door and put it on it, and then it had a hatch in the steel door where you could get past your food. Other than that, completely in the dark.
They said that you had a low wattage light bulb in there with you, but I think that was probably what they said.
Said you had a low wattage light bulb in there with you. From all of the prisoner accounts, you were telling me about the guy that in order to... Because when you were put in there, I think it was for 19 days.
It depended on what you did. There were people that were in there much longer. We'll talk about one of them.
But he tried to, or he passed the time by removing the button from his shirt and then tossing it in the room and then seeing if he could find it in the dark. We were talking about how you would, even for like a stint like that in the darkness and only seeing light when they opened to serve your food, which the food, you didn't get the same food if you were in the hole. I think it was bread soup, and water.
Yep. Just to try to think about it in the span of time, if you had 10 days in the hole, that was 240 hours that you were spending in darkness with nothing to do.
And no way to tell other than when they were feeding you about like what time it was. You're like, am I tired because it's dark in here? Am I tired because it's nighttime?
Mm-hmm. It just throws everything off. They said one of the cells, I believe it was the very last cell of the hole, didn't even have a toilet in it. It was just a hole in the ground that you would shit in.
It was the hole in the hole?
Yeah, and that's just to think about how you take for granted being able to use a toilet even though it's a prison toilet.
You know you're going to the hole, but then you have that brief 5 seconds where you're like, which one of these cells am I going in? And as you pass each successive cell, and you get past that third one, you're like, oh my God, one left. And then you pass that fourth one, and then you're like, I'm in the fucking hole.
I think that was reserved for somebody who did some real bad shit. But along with these movements during the day, every major movement was accompanied by a count. So if you were going into the lunchroom, or the mess hall, there'd be a count. If you were going back to your cells, there would be a count. If you're going out to the rec yard, you're going to have a count. You're going to have a count before and then after. And a lot of the times that they were in an area, they would do them like a half-hour count. At night, they actually had a 3-hour rule that you had like one check-in at night, but then each guard was expected to walk by and do counts every 3 hours during the night.
I think they said daily the count was between like 12 to 13, 12 to 15, something like that.
That's a lot of counts.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, with every time that you were counted, they said everyone went through metal detectors a minimum of 3 times during the day.
The metal detectors thing fascinated me because I never would have thought they would have had to have been one of the first people to have metal detectors, right? Because what would be the purpose before that, and how did we have that figured out back in the
I have no
30s,
clue
40s?
How that would be figured out. It had to be something that wasn't very sensitive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're not really bringing in sensitive materials if you're bringing in contraband or anything like that. So, as one does in a prison, there are going to be attempts to break out of said prison. And Alcatraz was no different, despite being the inescapable rock. There's still going to be attempts. And maybe possibly some successful ones, or a successful one, depending on who you talk to.
I don't know what the average escape per year in other federal prisons was, but there were 14 escape attempts in 29 years by 36 prisoners. Mm-hmm. That seems like so many escape attempts. I mean, every couple years you hear the thing go off. You're like, what is that? Somebody, or like you just pull into town and you're there for like 6 months and you hear this big siren go off. You're like, what the fuck is that? And some guy's like, somebody's trying to escape again.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, 14 over 29 years, that's less than 1 every 2 years. But at the same time, like you're saying, you could full on hear the sirens from the shore.
Yeah.
And after maybe the second or third one, you would then identify what that meant. and you would know exactly what was going on when that happened.
God damn it. Somebody just tried to escape Alcatraz again. Everybody be on your toes.
Well, out of those 36 prisoners, so 23 were taken back alive, 6 were shot and killed, 2 were confirmed drowned, and 5 missing and presumed drowned. So
It's a big assumption to make.
it's a big assumption to make. So going back to the earliest escape attempt, we have April 27th, 1936. Again, this place opened in 34. So literally 2 years. Didn't take long.
No.
So, and this is not a smart escape attempt. Just saying it didn't take long for the first attempt to escape.
I'm not sure this guy cared a whole lot about
Yeah, I don't know if
going
this was an
back.
escape attempt.
No.
Yeah.
Mortal escape.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Escape from the mortal coil. So Joseph Bowers was collecting trash when he basically just made a broad daylight attempt to climb the fence at the edge of the island. And there were, if you've ever played, I know keep referencing Call of Duty, that's all I can see in my mind because it's like a map of this island.
It's a good reference point, too, if you know.
So there were guard towers that aren't currently there because they were essentially wood guard towers or there's something that came down. Around the yard, there was essentially what they considered like gun galleries. They had them inside the prison too. We're going to touch base during on one of the escape attempts. But these galleries, basically, if you have the cells, if you're looking and you have the cells running up and down, the gun galleries were essentially the bookends at the top and at the bottom that went across the entire length of all the blocks. These gun galleries were essentially closed off by like a fence. Mm-hmm. And guards would be patrolling there with their guns. So essentially they could be looking down and seeing anything that was happening. They had gun galleries that would go, a third level one. That guy could watch all the people up on the third, and they were completely protected. So on the outside, they also had these watchtowers. So this guy goes to climb a fence in broad daylight, and they end up having to put him down.
This shocked me, and this very much surprised me about pretty much every one of these times that this happened. But they ordered him off the fence.
Oh, yeah. They didn't just, he touched a fence, shoot him. It was, any time that there was a prisoner death, there was an investigation.
When it was an escape attempt. I don't know if there was always an investigation into a prisoner death.
What I meant. But if you just tell him to get down, he gets down, no paperwork.
Yeah.
You're not having to go through anything like that. It's, only at the last... at the end of it, when it fails to convince this person, do you end up having to shoot him? So they ended up shooting him off the fence. He fell 50 feet on the other side of the fence, right?
Yeah,
he made it all the way up to the top.
He made it over the fence. But he got brought down the hard way.
Yeah, on the other side, which was 50 feet, and basically landed on the beach below where he was found dead. So first escape attempt in the books. Not a very good one.
No,
not very well thought out.
Not good at all. Didn't end well.
So December 16, 1937, we get it over a year later, Teddy Cole and Ralph Rowe filed prison bars to escape the prison shop.
These are my guys.
Are they?
I got a lot of hope for these two fellas. Not good people at all. Did some really horrific things, but I find myself in these situations rooting for them just because I kind of want to see it done. It's like I know that a prison break is a really scary, dangerous thing, but given the thought of hindsight, I kind of want to have confirmation that these guys escaped.
Just to know for sure that someone did it?
Yeah, and it's just kind of fun. It's not fun. It wasn't fun back then. It's fun now to think that these guys could have escaped.
So the prison shop essentially is another building. It's not the cell block, so it's in another location on the island. They filed the bars in their cells and then escaped to the prison shop, right?
No, they filed the bars. They broke a window, then they filed the prison bars in the shop.
Oh, okay.
And then from the shop, it was over, I believe, one smaller fence, and they made it to the water. Luckily, they did it on a foggy day, because the worst thing that you can have up in the worst thing that you can have up on a guard tower is fog, because you're above the fog, everybody else is below you, and you're not able to really see anything. So you get a natural cover in the day. And if there's top 5 things that the San Francisco Bay is known for, it's fog.
Yeah.
So you get a pretty good chance to escape. Made it to the water, jumped in the water, and their bodies were never recovered. So there were some startling statistics, and if we ever do an episode on the Golden Gate Bridge, it's pretty dark.
Oh yeah,
a lot of people jump off that bridge. I think they said that it was like for every 10 bodies that end up in the San Francisco Bay, only one of them isn't found. And so
one of them isn't found.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's pretty common that they find people floating.
There's only certain places that they wash up.
Yeah.
Very seldom are they, even at the Golden Gate Bridge, are they taken out to sea. They're usually taken and put on a location like a beach or something like that, where like
floating,
the tide will come in, something like that.
Yeah, they're gotten to fairly quickly. It's pretty. I think if you see a body out in the San Francisco Bay, people get on it pretty quick. Probably. But these two guys jumped out. They swam across. They did it during the day. I don't really know if that has any effect on the tides or anything like that. But their bodies were never found. They could have been swept out to the ocean. I think the chances of that being where they were, getting swept out to the ocean, is probably pretty slim, just because it's pretty far without being seen. Mm-hmm. There again, I have no idea. Nobody has any idea.
Well, the fact that the bodies were never recovered, they're going to automatically say that they drowned.
Yeah.
So that's where we get to the guys, I think, that drowned. This next one was an escape attempt that turned into something more. And this is where we come to the Battle of Alcatraz. And this took place over the course of, I think, 2 or 3 days from May 2nd to the 4th in 1946. So, again, this is years later.
Yeah.
This guy named Bernard Coy, Joseph Kreitzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Marvin Hubbard, and Myron Thompson basically had a plan to escape. And I think it was it Coy that had lost all the weight so he could sneak into and greased himself down so he could fit into the gun gallery?
Coy this was his escape attempt. He got some pretty impressionable people. Joseph Kreitzer was kind of like the first guy that he let in on it. Sam Shockley was a very young man who had mental disabilities. He was schizophrenic. I believe they said that his intelligence test put him somewhere at like an 8-year-old, maybe a 10-year-old. But he had done some bad things through falling through the system, what have you. He ended up in Alcatraz. He was kind of used as a decoy. Clarence Carnes was the youngest person, I believe, to ever be sentenced to Alcatraz. Also, not a great character, but I think he made it to Alcatraz when he was like 19.
Yeah.
Which is very, very young. Marvin Hubbard was just kind of along for the ride. He ends up taking the full ride. And then Myron Thompson was just kind of, I'll go with you guys to make this happen. But Coy worked very, very hard to gain the reputation of being an orderly, being a trusted person. Mm-hmm. But the whole entire time, he knew that he wanted to get out. I think he had said when he was sentenced that whatever prison they put him in, he was going to escape.
Yeah.
So going to Alcatraz,
calls his shot.
Yeah, he knew that he wanted to do this. Like you said, he got real skinny. He did a lot of exercises. I think they said he dropped like 30 pounds or something like that. And when the day comes,
what the reason he lost his weight is what they had seen is on the sides of the gun galleries, instead of going straight to the wall and then being like reinforced into the wall and attached to it, because they mounted these fences. There didn't used to be these fences on the gun galleries. Then they figured, okay, we need to put some protection because prisoners can get up here if they really needed to. So they put this like almost like not chicken wire, but like livestock paneling. It looks like, the thinner metal bars, because the guards had to be able to aim through them and see through them and everything.
They said there was a 5-inch gap.
But at the ends of them, yes, there was a 5-inch gap. But if you got in there and worked it, you could open it a little bit more and bend that mesh back a little bit. So he lost all this weight, so he was able to fit into that small gap, get up there and subdue one of the guards.
But his plan was brilliant. As an orderly, he had kind of the lay of the land as he was cleaning, and once he realized there were 2 guards that were in cell block C, and then Sam was in D, and there was 1 guard that was in D. Everybody was locked in there. He realizes he has an opportunity. He goes over to the door that leads to D and starts pounding on the door. It was like quiet hours. Mm-hmm. Shockley hears that. Shockley knows that that's his cue to go nuts, to drive a distraction for the guards. And he gets up and starts going crazy. There's a call over from cell block D from the guard to C. Hey, we have Sam. He's going crazy. I need backup. One of the guards ends up leaving and going over to D, and that's when Sam makes his move on the first guard. And
Not Sam.
Coy.
Yeah.
Coy makes his move on the first guard, and that's actually when he first gains access to the gun gallery because he sneaks up behind him, puts him in a chokehold, bashed him up pretty good. I think he knocked him out, and then he tied him to, I believe it was the catwalk leading up to that area. He had hidden a bag that had something called a bar spreader in it, and a bar spreader is just, I don't know, it's got 2 points on the outside. You stick it between the bars. You have something that you crank in the middle, and it spreads the bars.
Yeah.
He's able to spread that gap from 5 to 10 inches. And 10 inches is not very wide.
As long as he's able to get his head in. Basically, that's what it was. You get your head in, and then he lost enough weight.
And he greased himself up. He covered himself in axle grease.
Yep, he was able to get axle grease from the prison shop. So they end up getting access to some guard weapons, also get access to keys, and were able to take what would be considered the weapons room.
Yep.
So these guys are actually pretty decked out. Well, they need to have the set of keys in order to get out several doors to get out to the yard. And then what their plan was, I think, was to try to get to the docks and then take a boat back to San Francisco.
They had a 20-minute window between 2:10 and 2:30 that the boat is in port there. Mm-hmm. So they had that tight of a window to get it done. What they had to do was they had to get the last key, which was key 107, and it was to the door that leads out to the yard. They were going to be fully armed. They were going to start shooting. They were going to shoot their way down to the dock, and they were going to hijack the boat.
What they found out was the guard that they had subdued, the one that they took the keys from, had actually taken that one key off and put it in his pocket. They found it in his pocket. He ends up dying during this.
They didn't find it in his pocket. So what had happened was he was supposed to turn the key over to another guard that was on the outside, and as they switched shifts and changed over, he had forgotten to give that key to the guy, and instead of giving that key to the guy, he had put it in his pocket. So when he got overpowered and he got tied up, he was the second guard that got tied up because he got tied up in a prison cell. When they searched him, they took his pants off and took his keys that way to try to find it. Mm-hmm. And they went over to the door, and it was key 107. He had memorized that they needed key 107 to open up this door. Key 107's not there. He goes back and asks the dude, and he's like, I had to give it up to the other guy, fully knowing that he didn't do it. Mm-hmm. So as they leave, he starts feeling around where his key was, finds the key in his pocket, pulls the key out, throws it to another guard that they had tied up, and that guard shoved it in the toilet. They go back outside. They realize they don't have the key. They're looking for a clone or something that they can use to do it. And they start shoving keys in and just trying different random keys in the lock.
And they said that these locks were sophisticated enough. Again, it's federal prison.
Shocking.
To where after you made a couple attempts to use the incorrect key, you had to be able to make a couple fuck-ups, because how many times would a guard go up there and put the wrong key in and twist it and then be like, well, this one doesn't work, and then be like, oh, here's the right key. It couldn't be on like one time, but if you use this lock enough, it would fuck up the lock and it would disable it.
It breaks the tumblers on the inside.
So they basically, the one door that was between them and trying to make this escape attempt ended up being the one they couldn't get through. So at this point, they had eventually had 9 guards tied up in 2 cells, and were pretty much because they couldn't get out. And now at this point, the timetable had shifted. Stuff was starting to get around. I think, when were the alarms eventually tripped?
That was later on. After they realized that they needed the key, they went back to that same cell where that guy was tied up, and they pulled the guards out, and he searched the cell, and he found the key in the toilet. So
really?
They actually did find this 107 key. He goes down and tries it. As soon as he tries it and realizes that he twists it, he hears it click, but he doesn't hear anything unlock.
Because the lock's been disabled.
Yeah, because the lock's been disabled. So immediately they know that they have to figure out another way out. There's guards that are funneling in from the other side that they're taking hostage over and over and over again. So I think all in total they had 9 guards that were tied up between 2 cells. They realized at the time there was no way that they were going to be able to
get out now.
Yeah, escape. Yeah. So they decided that this was turning into more of a siege situation. And one of their brilliant ideas was that they couldn't get caught and taken if they killed all the witnesses, because there were still prisoners that were in the block.
Oh, yeah, they were the only ones that were really out.
Yeah, because Coy had gone through and released everybody. So they decided...
The guys in his crew.
Yeah.
Not everybody, okay.
They decided that they needed to kill the guards, because if they kill all the witnesses, nobody can identify them. Mm-hmm. Not thinking that the rest of the inmates that were just watching this shit show weren't going to be
aren't going to identify those guys. They're like, hey, do you want 5 years off your sentence?
Yeah.
Point out who did this.
They were going to be turned in.
Well, Coy assigns, I can't remember who he told. I think it might be Kretzer. There was a guard that actually he was friendly with and everything. He happened to be one of the guards that were tied up.
Logston, I think his name was.
And so they eventually, like I was saying, they had 9 guards tied up in 2 cells where they were eventually shot, wounding 5 of them. Well, this guard was sitting there, and Coy was telling Kretzer, he's like, you need to kill him so there's no witnesses. He goes and puts his gun against the bars to steady it, and as he pulls the trigger, click, he loads the gun and then shoots wide on this guy and hits his cheek.
Brushed his face,
and then basically turns around and leaves, and this guy plays dead. Now, at that range, they said it was about 3 to 4 feet, because he was a little bit up in the cell, that it was most likely him missing on purpose, because basically saying he didn't want to kill this guy that he was friendly with. Probably also knowing to a degree that this plan is fucked and they're not going anywhere.
I don't remember who it was. I think it was the C, so it was Kretzer or Carnes. I believe it was Carnes.
Okay.
And I think this is why Carnes gets saved, is as they go to try to figure out a different way out, they give Carnes a gun and they tell him to watch the 2 cells for any movement.
Okay.
And if he sees any movement in there, to either shoot them or let them... Oh, no, they gave him a knife. They told him if he sees any movement in the cells, he's to go inside and slit their throats.
Jesus.
He ends up seeing a bunch of movement in the cells and doesn't say anything.
Well, yeah.
He knows that he can't do it. He's a young guy. He was in way over his head throughout this whole entire thing. Once that happens, there's so many guards that aren't coming back that keep getting taken hostage that finally one of the guys on the outside is like, shit, I got to make a move here. I got to call the warden. Call up the warden. Old warden's asleep. His wife answers the phone. He's like, hey, I got to talk to the warden. The wife's like, he's taking a nap. She's like, no. I got some big stuff.
At this point, it's fucking 2:00.
Yeah.
Is this at night, right?
No, this is in the afternoon.
Oh, okay, shit.
He's just taking a nappy in his house, and his wife won't give him the phone. Finally, he's like, I think somebody's trying to escape. And his wife's like, okay, I'll go get him. So she gets him, gets on the phone. He goes, you better be sure about this, because as soon as you press that button to sound the alarm, it goes for 3 minutes and it can't be stopped. And just like you said earlier, it can be heard in San Francisco. So any time an escape might be happening, like, you have to go through that checklist of like, is it worth it to blow the horn now?
Yeah.
As opposed to if it's a false alarm and just freak everybody out. So eventually he decides to blow the horn. As soon as he does that, Coy and Kretzer realize that they're pretty much fucked, because that's the alarm to send everybody their direction.
It's a standoff at that point. So they essentially exchange gunfire with the guard towers and everything. Electricity is cut off to that cell block as they kind of battle into the night. So the prisoners are holed up, and they're the ones that are trying to break out are holed up in there. They are armed. The next day, federal troops end up being called in.
Well, I wrote that wrong. The siege happened during the night. It started at like 9:00 at night when the federal government came in.
Okay.
So they went all throughout the night, and they didn't actually get into the cell block, I believe, until the next day.
Okay. Well, yeah, they go over the night. So,
well, like you were talking about with those canisters, explain what they were doing as far as trying.
That's when the federal troops got there, right?
Yeah.
So they basically know at this point they have to incapacitate and try to kind of funnel these guys, and then basically be able to storm and retake the cell block. So they end up drilling holes in the ceiling, was it?
Yeah.
So they're on the roof, they're drilling holes in the ceiling, and then dropping, at that point they were dropping concussion grenades into where the guys were. not really taking into account, I mean, these guys are probably in a more defensible position, but also the fact that there are other prisoners in their cells still locked in there, just while this fucking gunfire is being exchanged, while these concussion grenades are fucking going off in the cell lock. And imagine you're in a box that is made of nothing but concrete and steel.
Yeah.
The reverberations and the sound and the concussion in there, it would be just fucking insane, blowing out your eardrums.
And you're still dodging bullets that are being fired into and out of the building.
Yep. The end result of it, essentially, is that pretty much all of the guys that took place in it, with the exception, was it Carnes?
Carnes was the only one that made it out alive, like through the whole thing. 2 officers were killed. One was from friendly fire, which is kind of crazy. It was Officer Stites that they determined. I don't know how, because they were firing the same ammunition.
Yeah.
Because they were using guard bullets and everything like that.
The federal troops might have been using different stuff.
Okay. They determined that he was killed through friendly fire. There was another one that expired in the jail cell. So all of those 9 people that were shot, in the guards that were tied up and shot, only one of them died.
Yeah.
So either they were a horrible shot, or guns weren't all they were back then, or these guys were just great at playing dead, because they played dead for hours.
Oh,
overnight until they were extracted.
Sitting there just bleeding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 inmates, once they had finally stormed the area, they kind of, the next morning, they pelted it with everything they had. They were dropping mortars into the side of the building.
They basically came in and then just lit the thing up with automatic fire.
Yeah.
Once they got these guys pinned in. 3 of them killed, and then 2 of them were sent to the gas chamber, survived and sent to the gas chamber, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the 3 that were killed, when they came in, they were sweeping the block, looking for them, found a utility hallway, and opened up the utility hallway. It was Coy, I believe it was Kretzer, and Marvin Hubbard were the 3 that they had found. Coy had a shot to the neck, or had a bullet wound in his neck, and they found him with a gun. Then they found, I believe it was Kretzer next. Kretzer had I think he was shot in the head, but he didn't have a gun. And then they found Hubbard. Hubbard was found with no gun and 2 shots in the back of his head. So they determined that all 3 of them were actually wounded in the gunfire, and then had gone to the same area to die, basically. Like, they had all died in the same utility hallway within 20 feet of each other.
Yeah, so it was Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard that died. Sam Shockley and Myron Thompson were gassed, and then Clarence Carnes was the one that wasn't.
So Carnes was basically given leniency based upon saying that he didn't narc on the guards.
Yeah.
That was his one saving grace. But Sam Shockley, this mentally disabled boy that, they killed him because he basically followed and just the wrong crowd. It was an absolutely awful thing. But throughout the whole thing, it took 3 days to get this under control. But they finally got it under control. It was a literal, the fact that it was the Battle of Alcatraz.
I wonder if you were in a position in San Francisco, like a building that was up higher than Alcatraz, if you had binoculars, if you could see the shit going on the roof and everything like that.
One of the documentaries I watched panned out to, it was somewhere along the bay. I don't think it was the wharf, but it was along the bay in the San Francisco side. And there were people 15, 20 deep just looking out, and the camera looked out and zoomed onto Alcatraz, and you could see the smoke billowing up from the building. They had a front row seat to a siege that happened within their.
Shit, I wonder if you could hear the gunfire and stuff.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
that building's going to insulate a ton of it, but if any of it was going on outside or anything like that.
Well, concussion grenades are going to be so loud.
Yeah. Well, speaking of escape attempts that didn't work, now we come to something that just might have. We come to June 11th and 12th of 1962. Players in this are Frank Morris and 2 brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, and then another guy named Alan West. Now,
poor Alan West.
I know. So Frank Morris was essentially, I think they said he had just shy of genius level IQ.
Yep.
Right? So he committed his first crime at 13. He was a career criminal. He had escaped from Angola. And he was sent to Alcatraz on June 20th of 1960. So as soon as he got to this place, he was already looking for a way to escape. Took him a couple years to get it planned and everything like that, but this guy was calculating.
We're going to have to do an episode on Angola. It's crazy. It's Louisiana State Penitentiary.
Really?
And I believe it has like the longest streaks of time in the hole.
Oh, damn.
For people. And it's like 30 years.
Jesus.
It's called The Farm, and it's one of the oldest prisons in the country, and it's a really, really bad place.
John and Clarence Anglin, they robbed banks, the Bank of Columbia, both getting 35-year sentences. They tried to escape in Atlanta. Again, there are only certain federal prisons at this time. So, what's crazy too, why are you fucking sending two brothers to the same prison?
I would chalk this up to a clerical error. Because John got sent October 24th, 1960. Clarence got sent January 16th, 1961.
Maybe at that point, if John was there and Clarence somehow knew that he was there, just from knowing if once he was getting transferred and everything, if he tried to do something to get sent there. Like you said, the cells weren't next to each other. Obviously, they realized what was going on. Oh, they were?
They were when they got to... eventually, they made it to cells that were across from each other.
Oh, Jesus.
And then the weirdest thing about this whole tie-up, we'll talk about it after you do Alan.
So Alan West was arrested 20 times in his life. He escaped a Florida prison, and basically when you escape other federal prisons, the answer is send you to Alcatraz. So he was sent in 1957. So he was there for 3 years previous to Morris, and then Morris got there a little bit before the first Anglin, and then obviously the second one.
So the weirdest thing about this four is that they knew each other.
Yeah, so Morris and the Anglins had actually served time together in Atlanta, right?
Florida.
In Florida, okay. And then how did West
had served time with Morris, I believe it was in Atlanta, maybe? I don't remember where they had served time. Maybe Allen and Morris had served time together in Florida, and then the Anglins had served time with Morris at one of the other federal...
There was a connection between maybe not all four of them together, but between the four men, they had ties to each other.
But like they knew each other.
Well, yeah.
How crazy is that to just know? Like you see them... Yeah, you see them rolling through the block on their first day. You're like, oh shit, I went to prison with that guy. I know that guy. That's John.
Hey, over here. I'll show you around. So, go ahead.
Morris was the man. Morris was the driver behind this whole escape. He had already escaped Angola. He really wanted to, and this, for as big of a deterrent as the Bay was, I also think the guys that got sent there, this was like the biggest cock tease in the world.
Meaning what?
If you made your way to Alcatraz because you were really good at escaping prisons, and then they put you in a prison that they call the inescapable prison, does it not make you want to try to figure it out?
100%. I don't think you're going to go to a place where you're just willing to resign yourself to not trying to escape. Morris had been in his cell, and I think he was like cleaning his nails or trimming his nails or something like that. And again, the vents in these cells for the forced air to like for ventilation, everything like that, they were at the back of the cell, and they were only 6x9. So you're not getting through there. Like we talked about, that guy got his head through when it was 10 inches, but he was still getting his body through that whole thing. 6x9, you ain't getting anything through there. Well, he took his little nail tool or whatever, and he used the scraping part of it.
The hook at the end of the file.
The hook at the end of it to like start scraping around, not the vent, but around like the area around the vent. And kind of the downside about having Alcatraz, and one of the big things why it was eventually closed, was maintenance and upkeep. If you're on the ocean like that, regardless of if, what the mixing of the salt water and the fresh water and everything like that is in the bay, you're still getting all of that spray coming in, and that salt water is essentially over time corrosive to like concrete and all the building materials. So
everything.
So even by the time of, him getting there in 1960 and everything, he starts picking at this thing, and he finds that the concrete is actually it's not super like crumbly and everything like that, but you can chip away at it.
Yeah.
It's not like regular concrete, like hardened concrete now, where you have to fucking hit it with sledgehammer as hard as you can to try to crack it, depending on its thickness. But he was able to start making kind of some progress on this. So he ends up taking like after he does that a little bit, he tries to then smooth it out to where it looks like he wasn't doing anything, and pretty much devises this idea that they're going to get through these ventilation shafts, and then at that point, kind of from there, build onto the escape attempt to find out what they can do.
This whole thing feels like Ocean's 11 to me. Like everybody has their one little job. Why was a
Clint Eastwood movie, my friend?
Yeah.
So they know for a fact there's certain things that you know that you're gonna have to do to get away from Alcatraz, whether it be getting out of the prison in itself. That's something that you can kind of learn as you take different steps into doing this, which is what they did for the prison portion of it. But you know for a fact that you're gonna have to fight the Bay. And so over 6 months, they collected, disregarded rain jackets. Part of their strategy too was anytime, because they had jobs at the different shops, anytime one of them left, he would wear a raincoat back and then stash that and then leave the next day without the raincoat and wear one back over the course of this time period.
It was one of the brothers.
And
what did he tell the guard when he got asked about it? He said he was from the South, and so he was always cold, and the rain jacket would insulate him.
Something like that.
And the whole reason that they needed these rain jackets was because they had said, I guess Alan West had said later on, that there was an article in Popular Mechanics that they had read that explained how to make life preservers out of like rubber.
Yeah, how to essentially fashion them to where they would trap air, and you were able to use them as a flotation device. So they basically use these rain jackets and using steam from pipes to essentially melt the rubber and fuse it together to make it, like a seal. They built these jackets into a raft and life vests. And as they're working also on these air ducts, they're trying to figure out how to do this faster and more efficiently, because as you start to make progress on this and all your plans are starting to come together, you want to try to do this as quickly as possible, because the longer you're storing these materials and everything, the more likely you're to get caught. So they end up using now I've heard either a fan motor or a vacuum motor. I heard it both ways. But he was able to essentially find either a vacuum motor or a fan motor, fashion it using like silver to weld it or something, and then a spoon.
Yeah.
And then a spoon, and basically made himself almost like an impactor, like drill, in order to loosen the ventilation shaft in the area around it.
So this whole plan comes together because Alan West's job on Alcatraz is he's a painter. Mm-hmm. He goes around, he paints the cells, he just does all the upkeep, and painting concrete's going to preserve it a whole hell of a lot longer. And they were supposedly famous for having like the cleanest prison floor in the country or something. They really took like,
if you look at it even
pride.
Now, it's shiny, like Broadway and everything like that. I'm sure they've restored it and everything, but like it's literally just that like shiny linoleum. It was concrete but painted over. It just had that sheen to it. So, one of the things too, you're like, well, how are you using basically a power tool and not being discovered by making this noise? They would only do the digging during times that other inmates were playing their instruments.
Well, to dig out all their air vents, they did it by hand. The drill only came into effect when they got up to the ventilation duct.
Oh, that's right, to get off the rivets or something like that.
So Alan is doing this painting, and he's up on top of the cells. He's painting one of this corridor that leads to all their cells, this ventilation shaft. He's going through and painting all that. He's on top of all the cells, and he looks up, and they had these 4 ventilation shafts that went to the roof, and 3 of the 4 had
fans
placed in it. The 4th one never did. So the 4th one was a straight shot up.
I think it broke and they never replaced it. They took the vent out and they never replaced it.
They never replaced it. So as he's up there, he's looking around and he's like, well, shit, this would be a pretty good area to start working on this. And this would be a pretty good area to get out to the roof. So he starts breaking off some of the concrete up there and he starts kicking it off the edges. And all of a sudden there's a bunch of dust and shit that's hitting this pristine floor. So he's like, well, if you just let me hang some drop cloths up here, That way we can keep the mess to a minimum in one area and it doesn't get everywhere. And they're like, oh yeah, it seems like a good idea. Let's put some privacy drop cloths up there to make sure everything stays clean. So they had this whole area cordoned off up there where they would work to make these rafts and shit at night. They said that they could go up there, and I think they worked for like an hour a night because they had to be back to be checked on. And they would go up there, they would work on the rafts, and this is where we were talking about, it was either a vacuum or a fan motor. They had taken a drill bit that they had gotten from a workshop. I was listening to this guy today who was in the prison when it happened, and he's like, yeah, we all knew that this was going on. Well, he's like, I smuggled them drill bits through a hollow leg of a chair.
Well, so between the blocks, so if you have the two blocks with their backs facing each other, it wasn't a shared wall. Basically, there was a 3-foot wide corridor that was between the two cells, and that's where essentially the air was pumped in and came through the ventilation ducts.
There were pipes and shit that ran through it.
Yep, it was for all the plumbing, but it had to be accessible, so if stuff had to be fixed or the plumbing from, because everything was on that back wall for plumbing, you had to get access to that from behind if you needed to. They showed us because each side of that corridor had a gate to it.
Yeah.
Or a door. So they opened the door and they just kind of allowed us to look down it. There wasn't a stairwell or anything in that corridor going up because you had to go through 3 levels to get up to the roof. So they basically had to shimmy up through pipes and climbing up that kind of stuff 3 stories in order to get up to this vent. And yeah, the prisoners would be like, yeah, we would hear sounds all the time coming from the fucking back of our cells. We knew something was going on, but no one's going to say shit.
You just hear somebody hit their head like, God damn it.
Yeah.
What's going on in there?
So now, as part of their plan as well, is because they were being checked on during the night, they needed to have time. They couldn't just, in the time it took, one guard's rotation, checked on them, and then by the time the next one got there, they wouldn't have enough time to get up to the roof, get down off the roof, get past a fence, avoid the guard towers, get down to the water, get the raft blown up if it wasn't already fully blown up at that time. So they had to buy themselves as much time as possible. So because this guy was working in the art shop as well, they basically made paper mache heads. Dude, this was the craziest thing because they had, when I went and visited, they had the cells mocked up.
Yeah.
For the ones that they had escaped from. And it wasn't even like they were sleeping at the other end of it, farther away, where the head was further away from the cell. They were sleeping to where their heads were closest to it. So you would just see, which I guess would work out better because you would just see the top of the head where the hair was.
And I have a theory. The toilet was at the other end of the bed.
Yeah, if you were standing facing the cell, the toilet was against the back wall.
So you probably wouldn't want to put your head towards the toilet, just smells, what have you. So it would make sense to put your head out towards the bars. But like you're saying, these paper mache heads that they built were so close that they had to be really lifelike.
Well, yeah. So they actually took hair from the barbershop on the island, collected a bunch of that, and it had to be the hair that matched their fucking hair color, depending on what it was. Made these paper mache heads and would use these. And the night that they were going to escape, they essentially put these in, covered them up with their blankets, and positioned themselves to where it looked like a body. And that's what was supposed to buy them some time, and it passed off when the guards came by to do their count. I would also imagine, too, maybe it was required to sleep like that, because as a guard, if you're walking through the prison and it's supposed to be lights out, I'm sure there were still some lights on, but you had to have not the full lights on for people to sleep. You would be able to look down as you're walking from the middle of that without getting too close to the cells and just be able to see someone's head. Whereas if it's dark in the cell, you're walking down there and you got to get closer to try to look into the dark to see if that person's right there. So I'm guessing it was a rule that they had to be able to go down and do legitimately a head count and just walk by and be like head, and make sure everyone was there. Well, it ended up working because the night they decided to do this, it ended up getting pushed up.
Yeah, it worked for 3 of them.
Correct. So what ended up happening is West had actually got his grade off, of course, because they all had to do this when they were going and taking shifts on making this stuff on the roof. But he had got his to where it wasn't staying in place anymore. And so they had him mix up. They were able to acquire some concrete.
They found it in the breezeway.
Did they?
Yep.
Found some concrete, mixed it up, and he was able to set the concrete enough to where it kept the area around the vent and everything like that in place. Well, what ends up happening is the England brothers are getting really antsy, so they decide that Morris isn't working fast enough. And as soon as everything's ready, instead of waiting and being like, okay, we need to plan it for this time, everything's good to go, pretty much as soon as everything was ready, it's like, it's time to go. So everyone is able to go ahead and get their vents off. It's go time. It's lights out. They've done a count. West goes to pull his vent off, and the concrete that he had set in there to keep the vent from falling now is preventing him from getting out. And he's like, I can't fucking get out. They're basically like, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. You keep digging, and then we'll just meet you on the roof.
Yeah. The massive oversight that they didn't see here of the reason that they were able to chip away at the concrete enough to get through there in the first place was because it was old weathered concrete. To replace that with new concrete that's going to be very strong and very hard
Regardless
to break.
if you're using, you have to use enough of it to keep the weight of that in position. So even hardening a little bit, fresh concrete, trying to dig through that with whatever tool you had, it's not going to be quick work.
No, not likely.
So West ends up getting trapped in a cell. Well, the other three, they end up running or climbing up to the roof. They get all their shit. They end up descending 50 feet off the top of the cell block down to the ground via basically a kitchen like vent pipe. So basically they're just like cartoonishly shimming down this pipe. They climb two 15-foot barbed wire fences while also being able to get the raft and the jackets over that thing without tearing them. This was barbed wire. This wasn't razor. This was
barbed wire. I don't think
I know.
it was
I'm just saying
wire.
razor wire would tear. So barbed wire you can maybe do something about.
And they had to have a way to inflate said raft. So West he played something called the concertina. I think it's like what are those fucking things called?
Accordion?
Accordion, yeah. And they had modified it to make it a blower, so
That's basically what it was, because that's what it does. Is it forces like a bagpipe? It forces air through certain reeds or pitches, and then
I'm sure they probably like stabbed a hole in it or something to put it into the.
And also make it to where it wouldn't make noise.
Yeah,
just use it strictly as a bellows.
Making noise is a real bad deal at this point.
Strictly as a bellows at this point.
Making noise also comes into effect because once they got up to this vent shaft that took them to the roof, they got up there, they'd use that drill to drill out some of the screws, and for some reason they hadn't thought about setting down the top fan that was up top, and they pushed it up and it fell. And I guess a bunch of the seagulls that were on the roof just exploded off of the roof, and it made a really loud noise. And one of the guards had heard it and was like, what was that? And he went and reported it, and his superior told him that it was probably noises coming from the hospital wing that was up on the top floor. So they just didn't investigate it. But they dropped this big vent up there that made a very loud clang that scared all the birds, and everybody in the prison said that they heard it. But they were all going to be quiet as hell because everyone
had been accounted for.
Yeah, well,
has anyone?
But all the prisoners didn't want to rat on them.
Yeah.
Like all the prisoners knew what it was, but nobody said shit.
Yeah.
So yeah, once they get down those barbed wire fences, they're kind of right there. And this is all. I don't know how this all worked, like how the recreation works, because I feel like they take some liberties here with just how like crossing it, going down that's kind of like common sense. But then they said that they ran over behind the power plant on the shoreline because you can't be seen from the guard towers there. Are we sure? Did they not just walk down to the shore and pump up and launch there?
No, I think they had to find a strategic spot that was out of the spotlights or where the spotlight range could go for where the guards were looking.
Yeah.
The power plant was a building that prisoners weren't allowed to go to probably anyway, so there probably wasn't a lot of need for security around that building.
True.
And they probably knew something like that, having watched it for so long. They end up getting behind the power plant down to the shoreline. They pump up the rafts and the vests and launch toward what's called Angel Island.
Angel Island's actually the opposite way from San Francisco, too.
Correct.
That was really surprising to me that they decided to go there first.
It makes more sense to me because now I don't know if they had any idea of the movement of the tides or anything like that at nighttime, because their time frames, the way they broke this down, because they've done a ton of stuff regarding this escape. Mythbusters has even done a thing where using this exact same stuff, they developed a raft and they saw if they could get across. They did do it on Mythbusters, and they ended up in a very specific location. But they also did it, I believe, maybe it was during the night too. I think they may have tried to recreate the entire thing. But depending on, even based on the differences of an hour, where you launch off the island, the currents will take you to very specific spots. This is where they kind of knew where to search and where to find things when they initially did get the search for these guys going. They launched toward Angel Island, which makes sense to me, that maybe not based on what they knew about the currents, because they wouldn't be able to see at night what was moving around and everything from their cells, most likely.
Yeah.
But it's possible that by getting somewhere that's less populated, it would throw off, because it's the common thought, like you said, I think, why not head towards San Francisco? Because you could try to blend in, get lost in the crowd. Maybe you have some people you know there that can help you, versus let's go to the opposite direction, maybe where they're not going to anticipate us to go. There's not as many people there, so the chances of us being spotted once this gets alerted and a manhunt's on is less likely. And maybe it's easier to steal a car. Over on this, it's more residential. There's not as many police over here as there are in San Francisco.
Well, I think Angel Island, it wasn't a populated island. It wasn't an inhabited island.
I think it's off another island, though, just really close. And then if you could get to that one, I think there might have been like a bridge or a roadway to get over there.
Yeah, or just a shorter swim.
Yeah, a much more manageable swim. They end up, like I said, the escape wasn't discovered until morning, when I think wake up was around 6 o'clock, 6:30, and they went to go, 3 prisoners weren't reporting for morning wake up, and so they went and found these guys. West was still in his cell, of course.
That poor bastard.
I know.
How sad is it to know that all 4 of you made paper mache heads, and I think they said the Anglin brothers named theirs, and
You just see West sitting there in his cell, knowing he can't dig out, just staring at the paper mache and being like, "You fucking idiot! You fucking idiot!" Just punching the shit out of it.
there's 3 cells that all there are just paper mache heads,
Well-
and then there's one cell that he's just sitting in there with his, and he's just having an argument with it. He's like, "You dumb motherfucker."
Well, the guy's trying to get and I don't know if he was trying to get Morris to respond. He's like, wake up, and he goes and sticks his head through the bars to hit him on the head, and the head literally just fucking falls onto the bed and rolls on the floor. Now, your initial reaction has got to be not that it's a head, and you're recognizing immediately that it's a paper mache head, but when someone's head falls off like that, your initial reaction is just like, oh, what the fuck, right?
Oh my god, what happened?
Yeah, and then finally figures out what's going on. The alarm goes off, and the search is on. Now, eventually they do start finding things, because they're not able to find any bodies or anything like that. They search for the places that maybe are presumed that things wash up, and they end up finding a wallet that's found on Angel Island on June 14th. So what was the actual date that it
I think it was 2 days afterwards.
Okay, so 2 days afterward, they find the wallet, and inside the wallet, I believe they found information that was about all of their family members, a ton of their family members, people they could contact once they were out.
It was the Anglin family.
The Anglin family, correct. Wasn't there also a money order in there that one of the Anglins had somehow acquired from within the prison? They found that remnants from the raft and an oar were found on the beach closest to the Golden Gate Bridge Park, on the opposite side of San Francisco. So the park is on the same side, technically, that Angel Island would be. Mm-hmm. Angel Island, I believe, is just much further in the bay. And of course, Golden Gate Park is going to be much closer to essentially the opening of the bay leading out to the ocean. And that's where they found the raft and the oar.
And they said that they were just basically shards of rubber that looked like they were either a life preserver or the boat. Mm-hmm. They had assumed at this point, and they assumed with the wallet too, they're like, oh, well, we found this wallet. It was just floating there and nobody was around it. So this person definitely drowned and was gone. Not, hey, maybe there was rough water and it fell out of the boat or anything like that. They just immediately assumed that it was because somebody went down.
Why isn't it still in the pocket?
Uh-huh, yeah.
I hate to say it, but it would probably take a little bit to get the wallet out of the pocket.
You'd think. But then finding these rubber rips in this ore in Golden Gate Park, they had achieved their mission. They had made it there. And they had also said that since it was all torn up, that they had believed that the boat had sank, and then that was just the debris that came in from the boat sinking, and they didn't make it. But at the same time, isn't that kind of like a 50-50 shot? Like, well, if the boat and the oar are here, that doesn't mean that they sunk and they just floated in. They could have just been left there.
Yeah.
They could have made it.
Because I'm telling you right now, the first thing you're doing as soon as you hit land is is your initial reaction, okay, we're free, let's keep getting as far away from this place as possible before we hear the alarm sound? Or is it, let's take extra time and try to hide this thing? Because here's the fact of the matter. They're searching regardless. Mm-hmm. It's not like you hiding that is going to make them go search another area. It's essentially a giant search radius around that area, and they're going to know based on talking to people that sail that harbor and everything. They're going to have people within San Francisco that work for forensics or the police department being like, okay, we deal with bodies in this bay on quite a frequent circumstance. This is normally where they end up. And your search radius is going to be just based upon all of Alcatraz, trying to find those guys.
And the tides, just really any little bit of information.
So finding that doesn't show anything, because that's just them getting up on the shore and being like, let's fucking goose it, boys.
Yeah. Either or. I mean, there was definitely a chance.
Here's the thing, too. Not only is there a chance, and I understand the water temperature, all of that stuff, but there's now races to Alcatraz or back from or not biathlons or anything like that. But
it's a triathlon.
There's swims from the island in which fucking ladies in their 60s do it and are able to swim that. Now, I know that's also with boats there to help them and modern equipment and everything like that.
Keeping the sharks away.
Correct. But at the same time, even, for instance, if, you got halfway to shore on that raft, and then the raft started to deflate and everything like that, so you started swimming, you only then have to swim that distance.
Yeah.
Which means you're in the water that much less. You're using that much less energy to get over there. It's entirely possible that as soon as maybe that raft started taking on a little bit too much water, they were just like, I think we can swim it from here. And and then the raft ended up in that location.
Mm-hmm. There's so many factors that I think of, and the common thought is always that there's no way anybody could do that and survive that. I do prescribe to the thought of you have to have more adrenaline pumping through your body escaping prison and doing that than you would ever have in your entire life.
Oh, yeah. And the further you get from it, not hearing sirens going off, every second that's not going off, that you're getting further away and possibly closer to shore, that's got to be just the fucking most exhilarating thing.
Yeah, so exhaustion does kick in. Your body does start to shut down because of the cold water and the blood going to your core instead of your extremities. I think you're running on so much piss and vinegar that there's a good chance you could make that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I would say 50-50 chance that they made it. I want to say more. There were so many little weird things that there's conspiracies that the FBI covered a lot of shit up. I don't really know how much credence that has. They said that one of the reasons they would want to cover it up is they didn't want the information to get back to people that on the island that you could escape Alcatraz. I don't feel like that really matters, because you should be able to cut off all the information coming into Alcatraz that they would never find out that these people made it. They could have just pumped a bunch of propaganda in saying that they found bodies. The FBI comes out and they're like, well, there were no reports of any vehicles that were stolen on that night in that area. Come to find out, there was something that wasn't reported to the federal government, or that said that wasn't reported to the federal government. There was a blue car that was stolen that night in the area. It was driving erratically. I guess there was a call that came in that same night saying they had almost been run off the road by the blue car that had 3 gentlemen in it. They couldn't ID them.
There was another car that matched the description the next day or something like that was saw in Sacramento, or was it Modesto? Somewhere north.
Yeah. So...
Or wait,
it was south, I think.
It was south?
I think Sacramento's south of San Francisco.
Heading for Mexico.
Yeah, trying to get out. What was it, like a week later? There was a postcard that showed up.
Yep.
and it was signed by all three of them, and it was like, haha, made it, or some shit like that. It said something very passive aggressive, if it was.
Yeah. And, you know, I think it's a 50-50 with this. This next one is going to kind of lead further credence to the fact that it's more likely for me that they did make it. On December 6th in 1962, John Paul Scott and Daryl Lee Parker attempted escape. Parker was caught 81 yards from the main island.
He immediately got out to the water and just gave up. He's like, "Fuck this! I'm going back inside." It was like when you walk in,
you feel under your toes, then you just turn them out immediately and just come right back out.
They shine the light on him, and he's up on the fence trying to climb back in.
What are you doing? I thought I saw something floating down there. I was going to snag it and bring it back to you guys. We're good. We're good. Well, Scott was actually found unresponsive at Fort Point beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, which is on, again, the park side, right?
I think that one's the San Francisco side.
San Francisco side. Now, when we say unresponsive, this guy's alive. He's essentially suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion. He had been carried by the tide to that location, approximately 3 miles from Alcatraz, and he actually recovered in the hospital and then was immediately returned to Alcatraz. Now, this is what leads to my point of this being very feasible for these other guys to make. These guys had flotation devices and also had possibly a raft that kept them at least partially out of the water. If it's just your legs and your core staying warm, your body's going to operate a lot more efficiently and a lot longer.
Yeah.
The fact that this guy was able to make it and was obviously in the water for a total of 3 miles.
He had water wings. He didn't have a raft. He just made himself some water wing floaties.
But the simple fact that he was able to survive that. Yeah, he couldn't get out because of the exhaustion and the hypothermia. But if you're in a position where you're only floating for half that time in that water because you have a raft or something like that, I think it's definitely leads to the feasibility of the 3 guys, at least a couple of them making it. Not saying all of them. I think we kind of talked about that. One of them, you said probably not as likely. 2 of them making it 50-50.
Yeah, I just think that depending on how big the boat could have been, I don't know if it would have supported the weight of 3 full-grown men. I
think it's a Jaws situation. The end of Jaws where, Chief Brody and then whatever Richard Dreyfuss's character's name is in that, when the boat ends up sinking after the shark takes it down, they end up going back to shore, floating on a board with just those 2 barrels attached to it. And when you're able to keep your upper body out like that and you're just kicking toward a direction, I think you're able to just go a lot longer.
The tough part about that, though, is once you get wet and once that wind starts hitting that wet clothing, it's just going to zap any heat that you could have in your body.
It does, man. But if they're also wearing, like, this sounds weird, but they have rain jackets. Yeah. If they're also wearing rain jackets over their upper body to keep that wind from hitting it and everything,
there's a chance. I mean, I see how the rain jacket could definitely.
I don't want any of these
deflect
scumbags getting out, but just the simple fact of this, like, these guys against this inescapable prison, it's almost like it would have been something where if they would have escaped and then got caught a week later, for me, it would still kind of be as exciting. It's like, oh, so these guys actually did successfully escape this. It was just getting to shore and being able to try to escape from there that's the impressive thing.
Yeah, it was like they won a game show. It was like they figured out road rules and made it to San Francisco.
Well, essentially after this last escape attempt, I think this combined with essentially the rising cost for operating the prison, the fact that it's obviously no longer escape-proof, and that at some point, regardless of what they do for upgrades, someone might actually fully escape, that they're not able to confirm or think or pass off that they actually drowned or didn't make it. The prison actually closes in 1963. It lasts, was it 29? Did we do 29 years? It lasted in operation. Just the simple fact that only 29 years and that thing is just completely notorious.
Well, and so much of the closing revolves around the fact that they were happy that it was there, but they didn't really care to keep it up. The operating costs were insane. I think they said by the year's close, it costs $5.25 to house an inmate at other federal prisons, and it was over $15 on the island. But there was like millions and millions of dollars of upkeep that they had just kept kicking down the road. And it came to a point to where after these escapes happened, like you said, and people are like, oh shit, well maybe we need to go back and look at this and see what we can fix. And then they look at the books like, oh, well, you guys were due for massive upgrades like 5 years ago and you haven't done anything. So now the costs of repairing everything are going to be worth so much more.
Now we can go buy cheaper land,
Yeah.
build a larger complex away from a populated area, and try to do this better. Our technology is kind of advanced to that point where we don't need the concept of an island or the deterrent of nature or the position to determine if this prison is inescapable. We can now make inescapable prisons anywhere we want to.
Yeah, and I'm sure probably when they saw how many people they had to send out there in that much of a time, they're probably like, well, shit, we probably need more of these. Like, this wasn't deterring very much.
You gotta imagine, too, people had to be like, I don't want that posting. I don't want to go fucking work out there. I don't want to have to be on this island 5 days a week with my fucking family. And the kids are going to school on the island. Like, that seems like kind of just a weird life. Like, there's a bunch of, like, information, and I don't know if they have podcasts, but it's called, like, Kids of Alcatraz.
Yeah.
That will come out and talk about what life was like, on the island and everything. So that's, that probably contributed to some degree, but it all comes down to money. So once the prison closes, they're no longer using it as a federal penitentiary. Crazy thought to think about, like you were saying, prisoners that went there, some people, that weren't there for violent crimes and weren't there for life sentences eventually made it out, and we get interviews from people who were actually at Alcatraz and could talk about that. You now get people, when this shuts down, of just getting sent back to other prisons. So it's not like when the prison shut down, for some reason there's this weird thing is that the prisoners were just like, we're taking them out with you. Prison, there's no place for you guys anymore. We just got to kill all of you.
Yeah.
But it's like, nope, we're just transferring you back to other prisons.
I think they said, too, that the majority, if not all, of the prisoners that were released after doing a stay in Alcatraz never reoffended and went back to jail.
The recidivism rate, or whatever they call it.
Yeah, it was just like zero.
It's the perfect scared straight program.
Yeah, and I think it was. And listening to some of the interviews for some of the guys that got paroled and got out, it wasn't like it is now where there's nothing they went back to. There was one guy that was talking about he got out. He married a lady and had like a 25 or 30 year long career in his job.
Was that the X-ray tech?
Yeah, the X-ray tech.
Yeah, and he was the guy that was talking about he had robbed banks. And he was like, they tried to offer me, he's at points, they offered me pardons. He's like, I would never take a pardon. And the reasoning wasn't like a pride thing. He's like, his realization was what he did to other people's lives. He's like, I completely messed up other people's lives, not by murdering anyone, but just going in at somebody that was trying to do their job, going in there and pointing a gun in their face. Like, that scars people for life. People will never get over that. It threw people's lives into chaos. And he's like, and I don't believe for that reason alone that I deserve a pardon. He ended up getting out and getting paroled and everything, but he never took the pardon.
It's insane that guy could have that much empathy to realize that. Like, I'm sure
I think that's more common than not. I really do. I just think it's not the buzzworthy or headline worthy type stuff. Like, everyone's going to be like, that's how it should be. So there's the expectation that that's how it should be.
Yeah.
So there's nothing impressive about it, but there really is.
Oh, it's 100% impressive for them to be able to take a step back
That
after sitting in prison for that long and be like, well, there were still victims here.
Yeah.
I didn't kill anybody, but there were still a lot of victims.
Yeah. Well, once the prison closed down, there was a charter or something like that stated that once the government was no longer using land, it should automatically revert back to the Native American tribes that were there.
The Treaty of Fort Laramie, they went all the way back to 1868 to find...
Well, I mean, the prison was in one way or another, maybe possibly around back then.
Well, and the fact that this whole little stipulation that was written into this was definitely something that they just threw in that they were never going to use. They're like, well, because it was like... out of use lands that were federally owned or decommissioned lands or anything like that would revert back to the native tribes like you were talking about. But I'm sure when they threw that in, they're like, well, if we just want it, we'll go take it back. Like, there was never that thought process in 1868 that they're like, well, if we just abandon this and they take it back over, then we'll just take it back over from them. Like that was the whole thought process back then. But it's funny to go back to such an old archaic thing in the 1800s and be like, we're going to use that in 1964.
So the island ended up being occupied by Native American activists for a time period and everything. the writing that they wrote on it and everything like that was still there.
Yeah.
It was really cool to see. Some people that went out there to kind of help them protest ended up setting fire to some of the buildings and everything. And because it was already dodgy with them essentially occupying this island that, according to the government, that wasn't technically theirs to occupy. Once this happened, that was their reason to go in and essentially end this occupation. So they went in and ended up forcing these people off. And then in 1972, the National Park Service gained control and now runs it as a tourist attraction in an island museum. And man, it's just like, I don't know what it is. It's like, it's definitely iconic. Like riding on the boat out there, like I remember riding out there, it was dark, but you see just this hunk, like this hunk of rock just sitting there, and you see some lights coming off, and you pull up and you're just looking around. You see nothing but water around you, and you're just like, yeah, like I can see why this is iconic. Just being here is like super intimidating, and it's really imposing, and I can understand the thought process of being like, this alone is going to be a deterrent to scare people.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But seeing it now, it doesn't have that feeling. You look at it now and you're just like, that's fucking cool. Like something on an island is just fucking cool.
Yeah, and it's such a. We were talking about it when we chose this topic, but as far as it goes, I think West Coast people know the most about it because they are the most likely to go to San Francisco and actually lay eyes on it. Mm-hmm. But it's still known in the Midwest. It's still known back east. People know what Alcatraz is, whether they've seen it in person or not. You went out and did the tour, and I just saw we drove around it on a boat when we did a tour of the San Francisco Bay, but we live on the West Coast, so we get to see shit like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if, and Rikers Island, I think, is just a jail, but back east, everything is still kind of operational. Like, they still use this stuff.
Yeah.
Alcatraz was decommissioned. It's not, it stopped seeing people in the 60s.
It no longer has that. That's a mystique about it.
Yeah.
Is that it used to be a prison. It's not like Rikers where you look at it and be like, that's still a fucking prison. There's still people I do not want to go anywhere near. Alcatraz, it's been long enough that now it can be romanticized. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's, I think that's probably kind of an unfortunate thing because some of the stuff gets lost because of that, but it also allows people to be able to see it. You know, over 1.5 million people a year actually visit Alcatraz and kind of get a peek behind like a slice of an era when fucking island prisons were a thing.
Well, and it's gotta still just be night and day, just like you were talking about, where now prison doors are run electronically, where back then they had to throw these big ass switches to get doors to open. The technology, you couldn't walk into Alcatraz and then walk into a new prison and see really any similarities besides the bones of the situation, cells and all that kind of stuff.
Cells and bars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, it's like the most primitive form of prisons that we still have that you can see in a massive structure like that.
Exactly, yeah. All right, man. You got anything else on this?
No, this opened up an interesting door. I'm curious to see the numbers because prison history, I feel like, could be pretty fun. We already did Attica, so this is kind of our second.
Well, I want to get into the actual American prison system. If we're going to do the next prison episode, I want to actually discuss the American prison system at this point.
The prison industrial complex will be a very long, conspiracy-riddled episode.
All right, guys. Well, look forward to that when that eventually does come out. And thanks for joining us on another episode. Have a good one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.